thing is I've heard from a few people at the conference that when they show up for some talks, the talk begins and like right away they don't have context, like they're not sure what exactly the talk is about. So if you feel that way, you can also catch me afterwards and ask for context, like what is this thing? Why is it here? What are you talking about? So the context I'm going to start with is I want to propose an approach to migrating Zcash to incorporate proof of stake. And the idea here is this could be a first step. And it's called the trailing finality layer. So the first piece is talking about the motivations or the goals of the design. So the first piece is this word finality. We want to add finality to Zcash to improve some existing use cases and to enable some new ones. So the ones we could improve are any use cases that today require waiting for many block confirmations. So the prominent example in my mind is if you deposit ZEC on an exchange, you usually have to wait a given amount of time, like an hour or something, for a certain number of blocks. If we had finality, exchanges might be able to shorten that time significantly, which would just be nice or more convenient for users. And it can enable some new things to be built on top of it. And a key area I'm really excited about is trust minimize bridges to other blockchains. So just to be clear, this design itself wouldn't include any bridges to other blockchains, but it would be a good building block to do so. The second goal would be enable a way to do staking and earn yield, and also build out all of the infrastructure and code and products for those users.
Industries working in technology, consulting, project management, and I've always had a personal interest in free and open source software, as well as tools that help us keep our privacy. You may know someone that is always trying to get people to use GPG encryption on their email and always attaches his public key to the email. That's me. I hadn't really had crypto on my radar until one day while reading about new improvements in cryptography and other tools that you could use more as a consumer for digital privacy, I stumbled upon the Zcash website. So I discovered that someone had built a publicly available privacy-preserving payment network, and it was already there. And my mind was blown. I just kept asking myself, why isn't everyone using this? I tried to read as much as I could about Zcash, and I also joined the community at the forum and the different social channels. And through there, I also started understanding a little bit more about the challenges of answering this question. So throughout those discussions, one of the things that I kept seeing was that there was a gap in the ecosystem. From the beginning, I was always interested in using Zcash. I wanted to buy things with ZEC. I wanted to transact with it on a day-to-day basis. And if you go back far enough on ZEC pages, you probably will find a post that says, someone should make an app for a cash register for ZEC. And that idea came up to me, and I just kept thinking about it for a while. I spoke to some people in the community about it. Eventually, as I got to know a little more about the technology of Zcash and how it works, I got an idea around October of 2021 of what became the mechanism underlying Zgo, that allows for non-custodial payments to be handled by our app. I usually carry a pocket notebook with me, and as this is a screenshot of my notebook when I finally thought of how could this actually work. And a couple of weeks later, my wonderful wife Lily came up with the name Zigo, and I went ahead and bought the domain, and that started the process of actually creating it. So I started creating a small prototype to prove that my idea could work and it's something that I could implement. And after that work, I decided to keep going. I shared this idea with my father, who also has always been interested in open source software, programming, computer science. And we started discussing about those challenges that we thought are preventing vendors of accepting Zcash for payment in their businesses. So we decided to try to identify these challenges and also find ways that the features of our app could address those challenges. One of the big ones is that the ZEC price changes. So we decided to put a live price feed in the app for major fiat currencies, and also to allow the vendors to price their items in their local fiat and have our app handle the conversion. Another challenge that we identified is that sharing your address is cumbersome. It's not something that you want to type by hand, let alone try to dictate to someone so they can type it in for you. And ZEC has 8 decimal places on it, and entering an amount manually and missing a 0 here or there could actually end up really hurting a business or really hurting a customer. So following the example of the ZEC pages, we looked into ZIP 321 and decided to implement that standard for the payment URIs and encode them into QR codes to take that burden away both from the business and from the user, and we can ensure that we have accurate addresses and accurate amounts. Another challenge that we identified for a vendor is that they would have to monitor their wallet to see when they got paid, who paid them. And we thought that that's something that we could have our system take care of by using the viewing keys, which is, I think, one of the biggest strengths that Zcash has. And one last challenge that we identified is that most localities will require some sort of accounting for your crypto business. And given how we designed the app, we were able to record that information for the business, especially the cost basis and the dates and the timestamps on which every little SEC that they receive, and then make that available to the business as a data download that they could use with their accountant or their tax professional to then meet any requirements that they may have for tax purposes. So at this point, it's when we start considering that maybe we should submit a proposal to CCG. We have seen other apps submit a proposal successfully to build something for the community. We were very focused on this initial use case, which was retail brick and mortar type point of sale, which was our original idea. But then we also received a very detailed, very thorough feature request from the community. This community member brought to us the use case of a professional selling their professional services. And in most cases, they use invoices to get paid. And those invoices are rarely handled on a, face-to-face manner. They are usually emailed to someone. But besides that use case, this community member made a very compelling argument for integrating with existing applications. Rather than creating yet another separate system that a small business would have to try to juggle with their existing systems. And I thought it was a very, very good idea to foster adoption of Zcash as a method of payment. So combining these two ideas is what became our proposal. And that's what we submitted last year. And we were very excited when it was approved late June 2022. Do you remember what else happened on late June 2022? The sandblasting began. So the entire ecosystem, in essence, had to pivot away from the roadmaps. Our original plan was to begin with unified addresses. The network upgrade 5 had just been completed, and we had Orchard live, and unified addresses were coming. But as both the protocol teams and the wallet teams had to move away from their original plans to address the network load, we then had to also adjust our plans, because if the wallets didn't support unified addresses, neither could we. So we decided to put on the unified addresses on hold and instead move with the rest of our plan using the sapling pool. And at this point, then it became about delivering that plan. So we started working on the payment confirmations on chain, which was one of the biggest stepping stones into the rest of the integrations that we were planning to develop. The next big integration that we decided to create was integrating with the Zero business application. So Zero is your traditional business accounting, customer relations management, invoicing application. But it allows us to create a plugin. So now a business that sends an invoice, when the client clicks that Pay Now button, they now have the option to pay with Zcash. At that point is where Zego would take over, process the payment, and then report that back to the business. We then used a very similar architecture on a different use case, and that was our next integration, which is with WooCommerce. WooCommerce is one of the most popular e-commerce platforms for WordPress websites. And we created a plugin that allows existing shop to provide the option for the customer to pay with Zec. And in a similar fashion, we can then take that order from that point, we process the payment, and then report back to the shop. One of the key components of this is that these two integrations mean that the business itself, they don't have to change anything about their operations. From the perspective of the business, that order looks exactly the same as if it had been paid with a credit card, and they can just go on around their merry ways, and Zcash becomes just another set of payment rails. And they don't have to adapt their business processes. They don't have to adapt how they account for anything. And Zego even allows other plugins in WordPress for e-commerce to interact, and we have already tested out that auto-fulfillment can work when Zego reports back to WooCommerce that the order has been paid after it's confirmed on chain. So something that I didn't expect at the beginning when we started is that in order to build and test Zego, we started developing these little scripts and tools and other things that were helping us to meet our goals. And we realized that this could probably be helpful for others in the community. So we kind of put that together, polished it a little bit, and released it. The first one is Zenith, which is a command line interface to Zcash D that allows you to send and receive transactions, supports Orchard, and it also supports zip 321 for the payment URIs, which I think it can be useful for someone that wants to run their full node and wants to have a little easier time using it on a day-to-day basis. And the other item that emerged out of our work in Zigo that we're very excited about is the Zcash Haskell library. So thanks to some recent developments in the Haskell ecosystem, we are now able to bring some of the great code and functionality that has been developed on Rust for Zcash, including what has been mentioned earlier in other talks, all the work that has been done auditing the Rust code that Zcash depends on. And we can bring that functionality to the Zcash ecosystem in Haskell. And this is something we're very excited about because it opens a lot of additional possibilities for our apps. So there are a few lessons that I want to share with everybody from my experience going through this process is that personally, it took me quite some time to go from, hey, I have an idea to maybe I should build this. And I think one of those obstacles was that, I just learned about crypto 2 years ago. I didn't feel like I was part of the community at that point. I'm not a cryptographer, and although we've been ramping up in like the inner workings of Zcash, we are more on the side of being users of the technology rather than developing the underlying cryptography. But now I realize that that is really not an obstacle to join this community. There's a lot of contributions that can happen without you having to been in crypto for long or having the depth of understanding of the cryptography. And that ties into the second lesson, is that the Zcash community is more than willing to help you. From the ZecPages team and the Nighthawk team answering my questions about how to encode a shielded memo through shielded memos, to the Zigo logo, which was actually designed by one of the members, our moderator, Jay, from the Telegram community, and freely shared very generously with us. I think one of the strengths of the Zcash community is that everybody is willing to help out in any way they can. And I think that is something that if you have an idea that you want to bring forward, I think that you should look into asking people around it, and then you will be pleasantly surprised at how much help will be offered. Another lesson is that we should always make good plans, but also you need to remain flexible. The crypto environment is always changing for one reason or another, and it's better to be prepared to have to adapt from the get-go, and be willing to pivot in different directions. Our original idea was focused on retail, and then we ended up moving away from that into integrating with existing business applications. And I think they're all valid use cases, but having that flexibility is, I think, one of the things that will allow us to grow the community more organically based on how the community responds to the things that we create. And another lesson that I want to is that try to share as much as you can with the community. The things that you are creating, even if just for yourself, may actually be useful for someone else, maybe the stepping stone that someone else needs to take that next step with their project. And I would definitely recommend that if you have ideas, if you're building things, it doesn't necessarily have to be code. I think the Zec Hub is a great example of this. So is the Zcash Latin America, where people are sharing what they like to do, what they enjoy producing, what their skills are, and others are picking it up and turning into something else and using it and growing it. And I think the growth that we are seeing both from Zec Hub and the Zcash Latin America, Zcash Brazil, shows that sharing this is one of the best ways to help grow the community. So what is next for us? We are now going to implement unified addresses for Zego. There were some technical challenges that we had on dependencies on Zcash D, but thanks to the work that we have done with that Zcash Haskell library, we can now resolve those technical challenges on our end and remove that dependency on Zcash D. And we're really excited about implementing unified addresses here. Another thing that we want to work on is just keep developing the Zenith wallet and also developed Zenith Lite for desktop. I think that the desktop wallet space right now could use a new wallet that is available and it's easy to use, and we're definitely excited about starting the work on this. And interrelated with all of this is to continue adding the functionality to the Zcash Haskell library. Now, being able to leverage the code that exists in Rust from Haskell for our development is opening up a bunch of new possibilities of what we can accomplish with our applications without having to rely too heavily on the full node implementation. So we're looking forward to developing more of this. So are there any questions?
There are a few questions here. Let me bring them up just one sec. Okay. Do you consider moving to Africa as part of Zego priority?
We don't currently have a specific target. We are working with communities and reaching to members of the community to figure out who wants to use the application, and we're happy to work with anyone from the community. I think that in certain areas where the use of Zcash is more of a pressing need, are definitely it's somewhere where we can definitely help. I think having a tool like Zego can remove some of the friction for people to accept Zcash, make it a little easier for people to accept Zcash for regular payments. And we would be happy to work with the Zcash ambassador in Africa and anyone else. Yeah.
Do you plan more dissemination through advertising so that businesses and entrepreneurs start using Zego?
That is a good question. I think that there's a difference between advertising and marketing, and I think advertising can be something that seems straightforward. You know, you hire an advertising agency and then you pay for it and then it's out there. But I think marketing is a little more effective. And what I mean by marketing is I think we need to find communities that want to spend ZEC. I think the key is to finding both the buyers and the sellers and bring them together with the tools that make the transaction easy. And I think just advertising that Zego is out there and you can use it is probably not enough. We have done quite a bit of outreach to vendors asking, well, here we have a tool, it makes it easy for you to accept ZEC, and usually the question is, well, who's going to come and pay me with ZEC? And it's difficult to point to a large group and say, like, these 300 people are going to come at least once a week. And if you can provide that to a vendor, it's usually not worth the effort of implementing something different. And I think the best approach is trying to find those communities where people that are willing to buy things with ZEC and people that are willing to accept ZEC as the payment and bring them together from both sides to try to create that circular economy that some of the ambassadors have been discussing. I think that is going to have a more lasting effect than an advertisement campaign could probably have.
Do you know if the integration can be improved using Zebra?
Right now, the integration does depend on some of the wallet functionality in Zcash. With the new developments that we have for the Zcash Haskell library, some of that could be offloaded from Zcash and then handled by our server itself, at which point probably Zebra and Zcash would be pretty much interchangeable. But the current version definitely depends on some of those wallet RPC endpoints from Zcash.
Can merchants use Zgo to accept Zcash but have it automatically converted into a stablecoin or fiat?
Well, Zgo is completely non-custodial. So the ZEC goes straight from the customer to the business's wallet. We never take any custody of that ZEC, so we really wouldn't be able to do anything with it. I think if that is the goal, I think it would be something that would need to be implemented more at the wallet level. I think that is also a question that has come up as part of onboarding, because the best example that I have for it is like in the old days when people used a lot of cash. Part of your business operations was to empty the till and then go deposit that in the bank. I think that with ZEC being digital cash, the process should be very similar, and the business can decide based on their operations and what's the most effective way, periodically take the ZEC that they have collected and then either exchange it into fiat or some other token that they feel more comfortable holding for the long term. But I think it's also something that would be very personal for each business on how much they want to hold in ZEC for how long. But right now, given that we're a non-custodial service, it's really up to the business on how they want to manage their ZEC.
That's all the questions we have on the Whova. If there's anyone in the audience that has any questions, we can field those. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah. Oh, Roosevelt. Okay, we'll get a mic.
Hola, en español.
Claro, no hay problema.
Además de WordPress, ¿se tiene previsto, pensado dentro del roadmap hacer algo para Joomla u otro CMS?
Hemos investigado otras opciones y muchas de estas opciones tienen restricciones. Lamentablemente, estas empresas buscan siempre tratar de contener a los clientes y no permitirles salir de su ecosistema. En esos casos es un poco más difícil crear estas integraciones y estos plugins porque ellos intencionalmente quieren mantener todo el sistema bajo su control. Hemos hecho investigaciones sobre otros sistemas, por ejemplo, QuickBooks es uno de los sistemas de manejo de negocios, pero de nuevo es la empresa que controla QuickBooks no quiere abrir el ecosistema a otras empresas. Otros proveedores de pagos funcionan de una forma muy similar, de que tratan de capturar a los negocios y forzarles a utilizar su sistema de recibos, su sistema de pagos y mantenerlos contenidos dentro de su propio ecosistema. Entonces, requiere un poco de análisis y si alguien encuentra una aplicación que ellos consideran que podría ser un candidato para una integración, hemos diseñado el sistema en una forma que le hace flexible y podríamos crear diferentes integraciones.
Gracias.
Claro.
Hi. My background primarily is retail, and the thing that really bothers me is that we don't use Zcash as a money. And I have thinking and talking everything about it during this Zcon, and I was thinking, is it possible to use the as a POS, or it will be more too much? It will be too expensive, like to us to have a machine. Then it will be easier, like a.
Well, our original idea was to create a point of sale, and that's what we implemented. I actually could have it. I have it even here on the. And we built it in a way that it can run on any device. You can do it on a cell phone, on a tablet. It's most point of sales nowadays, they want to tie you into their particular hardware. And right now you can run it anywhere and you can create your orders. And then you can request for payment right now. You could offer it, pay it, and it's done. So that was our original idea. I think that the challenge in that case has been more about finding those businesses that are willing um, to accept ZEC, especially because I think that one of the challenges that we need to figure out is for the foreseeable future, most businesses are going to have to live in both worlds. It's really too hard to ask for a business to just accept ZEC. They're going to have to accept the people that come in wanting to pay with ZEC and the people that want to come in paying with cash or credit cards. And in many cases, having to juggle the two systems could be challenging because, like I said before, the existing credit card payments tend to just want to keep people trapped in their ecosystem. They don't offer very much options to add a plugin and connect. So, but we have the functionality for point of sale. We try to build it as flexible as possible so it runs on any device that basically can run a web browser. And yeah.
Hi. What's the benefit of using Zenith over Zcash D, and does it have support for the memo field?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well, but what's the benefit of using Zcash D?
Zenith over Zcash D.
Oh, the Zenith wallet, well, basically the comparison is the Zcash CLI program, the Zcash CLI. If you've ever played with it, it's a very low level interface. For example, if you wanted to send a transaction, you have to write raw JSON and hand it over type thing. And that can be difficult. Another good example where we had to build the tool is if you want to send a memo, a shielded memo through Zcash CLI, you have to do the encoding of the memo yourself separately and then put it together. We kind of like just abstracted all of that into the interface, so you can just type your memo and send it, and it'll be correctly encoded into the message and into the chain. That was kind of the root of Zenith. Was we needed to manipulate transactions, we needed to manipulate the node to develop our application and to test it. And as we did, the features started piling up, and it started becoming a fairly complete, though simple wallet. So that was the motivation. And another thing that came up originally is that we were trying to experiment with unified addresses and creating a unified address on a node. Again, you have to work with the RPC and then work with the JSON file and the output. And we just abstracted that out so we can create new unified addresses in a more user-friendly manner.
Just 1 sec.
So, yeah, I know you said that currently it's not a custodial solution, so obviously no ability to convert automatically. But would you ever have would you consider at some point offering a second option where there was a custodial solution for businesses which did want this automatic sort of just convenient conversion?
We've thought about it, but it is a tricky question, especially because we are US based. I think, unfortunately, the regulatory environment for US based entities in that respect, it's a little uncertain, and at the time, organizations that one of the reasons other crypto payment providers have kind of cut off the United States is because of that uncertainty, because we don't have clarity on the rules of when are you required to meet a certain legal standard and get certain licenses and when you don't. And given that it's a big gray area, it's a pretty big risk from that standpoint. And another thing that concerns me about being a custodial service is that at that point you also become a bigger target for something like a hack, where if they know that there's a lot of Zec sitting in a particular service, it's going to be a pretty attractive target for someone trying to get to that Zec.
So I suppose, though, as it just works from directly wallet to wallet, if someone else were to develop in a different jurisdiction, were to develop something that could stand alongside your service, then that could be something that
certainly,
dovetail.
because in the end, the Zec is at that wallet address, and what gets done with that Zec is certainly just up to the owner of that Zec. I think that's one of the advantages of the non-custodial, is that, once they have it, they can decide how do they want to transact with it, keep it, swap it, and it will be up to the people that own those coins.
Sounds good.
Any particular reason why Haskell was selected?
That's a good question. Part of it is just personal interest. I like functional programming, and another reason is that Haskell is actually really good at writing parsers. And a lot of what we're doing here is basically parsing stuff, parsing transactions, parsing memos, trying to find things inside the transactions, which makes it very, very well suited for the task. And Haskell also tends to be very good at concurrency. And we believe also that if we were to scale very quickly, our code would be able to support that additional load without too much trouble, without having to, move to something completely different just because, they just can't handle the load. There's been very, very large systems built on top of Haskell or derivatives of Haskell because of that system.
If there's no more questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much, Rene.
Thank you.
You mind up where the chairs? Cheers.
slashed in that sense. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, it almost sounds like I thought of two things. I'm not sure if you're saying, but one would be, is there any way to have evidence about proof
Yes.
of work misbehavior?
Yes, absolutely.
I hadn't thought of that.
Okay.
And the other might be, what was the
If you
other one?
attack on both sides, so I have two choices, and because like this is fluctuating. When the transition happens, it's fluctuating. You have a strategy to attack both sides, and
Yeah.
if and only if you can actually make it harder, considering both sides, then the security margin gets the sum of it. Otherwise, they might win. I'm just thinking out loud. I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder if that could also help with the minimum property we don't like. I've never thought of it before, so I'm glad we're doing a workshop. Okay, so proof of stake accounting rules. I don't know, I didn't do anything here yet, but so first of all, I just wanted to point out there's known designs people are working on who seem really smart on integrating proof of stake consensus with private ledger systems that use commit nullify, similar to Zcash. So presumably we can look at what they're doing and maybe just take it wholesale for our purposes, except we have a few things that are unique to Zcash. So one is the issuance constraints. As far as I know, I don't know too well how a bunch of different proof of stake protocols do issuance. I mostly know about Ethereum, but I assume, I'm not aware of any that have like a supply cap or the kinds of constraints we have with Zcash. And yeah, there's a question.
As far as I know, which is not very far, Penumbra and a lot of other systems try to maximize privacy in the sense of how much information is visible to the public about the amount of stake and the behavior of the so-called validators, which in your system are called finalizers. I personally have a contrarian opinion that those things should be transparent to the public instead of being private. And I'm wondering if in your requirements or goals here, there's requirements about the privacy or transparency of these different parts.
I didn't write them down, and I kind of, but it probably should for like a comprehensive design. But as you can see, so far I've been treating the accounting rules as kind of orthogonal. Like we could choose different kinds of accounting rules maybe that would still work with the main design. So for an actual proposal, if we're going to show up to the Zcash community with like zips, all of that would have to be spelled out. But I'm wondering if it's possible to sort of figure out, can the general structure of the trailing finality thing work well enough without knowing the details of the accounting? Does that make sense? Like I want to see if I can tackle that top level problem first, and then, but yeah, I would think we want some, I think we want some information public for accountability and then other stuff private. And there's a really dumb, simple thing to do that's like approximately close to what I like, which is just use transparent accounting rules, but the only way to, like, let's say the only way to create a staking bond is coming out of the shielded pool. So the bond has a publicly visible amount, and it's associated with a finalizer's ID, which is publicly visible, because you want to know what is the size of the bond. Or if there's delegation, you want to know like what's the total amount delegated. You don't necessarily need to know, well, it's kind of an open question. Do you also want to know like how many delegations there are? That's not Sybil resistant, but you definitely want to know the total amount delegated because the protocol needs to know that for the voting weights. And it seems like we should all know the voting weights of the infrastructure. So yeah, there's some design questions there about privacy and transparency and accountability. Okay, let's do a workshop now. Was there another question?
In general, if all of the stakers have their stake public, at that point, is there any privacy issue compared to the existing system?
Privacy issue. Well,
So if I come out of my shielded pool and I say, okay, I want to be a finalizer with 2ZC, at that point, I'm revealing to you that, or I'm forced to reveal to you that I had transactions worth 2ZC that came to me.
yeah, so that's what I'm saying is there might be a continuum. So maybe I would argue a protocol that could still have, okay, so a protocol where the total, like the voting weight for all of the nodes is known publicly, but who contributed, like how many users contributed to that through delegations or things of that nature could be private. That might be like an ideal in my mind. And the reason is because I'm always sort of keyed into like social, like user activated soft fork. So like what if a validator is known to be behaving poorly and the users want to out of band of the protocol, like halt the protocol, we're gonna kick out that validator, like an out of band slashing basically. And the reason I'm really keyed into that is because I thought it happened, or I think it happened once with Steam and Hive. Like Steam had this malicious takeover from the Tron guy. Like Justin Sun, he like bought a bunch of Steam. So he like dominated the validation of the network and then imposed like some change or something that none of the users liked. And so they sort of forked the state of the network and just cut out his balance to make Hive. And I feel like preserving the ability of the community to coordinate things out of band is really valuable. So sometimes I like transparency for accountability. But there could be a range of like different people have different positions.
There's also a problem you run into with updates to the finalizer set, because if you know the balance of like the total weightings at one point, and then someone new comes into the set and you know the total weightings after, you can look at the difference and extrapolate from there, and to reveal some kind of information about the staking size. Yeah. So hiding that at all can be tricky if you wanted to keep the voting weights public.
Yeah. So like one common thing for that kind of issue might be batching, like batching and revealing or whatever, but it's complicated. So workshop. I also have a brainstorm of like other stuff that I think is even different from what we've already put pins in, because there's lots of pins. But one thing we were just kind of talking about is what I think of as social coordination tech. So first of all, we know the gadget can halt. How do users, like, what do we tell users? Like, what do you do if that happens? Is there a way to, presumably, like a story that sounds good to me is like all of the users are somehow communicating through different channels, and people have done an analysis of what happened and identified a problem, and everyone agrees on, or enough people agree on how to resolve that. And once they agree, they go through a process to restart the gadget. This is basically what all of the BFT protocols have to do if they halt. My concern is if we don't think about that a bit and see if there's ways we can help users coordinate. That it's kind of dangerous because basically I'm concerned that sometimes some BFT protocols, like if they halt, it's just an in-group of validators in a Telegram channel who are like, let's restart the network. Tell me your IP number or whatever. And that makes me really nervous because what if some of those folks are malicious and users know that and
conscious effort. It was easy because there's so many cool things going on. You know, non-ZF, non-ACC, the rest of the ecosystem. It wasn't a struggle to find speakers. It was actually a struggle to filter them. Yeah. So it's like, Danica, should we get started? Welcome to the Zcash Ecosystem Grant Funding Panel. This panel is comprised of individuals who have all held or hold important roles in the Zcash funding ecosystem. The Zcash Foundation provides administrative support for the Zcash Community Grants Program, ZCG, and ZF runs the Minor Grants Program in consultation with ZCAP. ZCG funds independent teams entering the Zcash ecosystem to perform major ongoing development or other work for the public good of the Zcash ecosystem. The ECC Filecoin Grants Program focuses on projects that lead to additional utility for the FIL and ZEC chains and their respective ecosystems. Individuals and teams have multiple options when it comes to requesting funds for projects that support and grow the Zcash ecosystem. Grant funding not only supports the development of Zcash, it also contributes to decentralization within the protocol. These programs have successfully funded a wide range of projects, including research and development, educational initiatives, and community support. However, there's still room for improvement in the efficiency and impact of these programs. So let's kick off this panel. To start, please introduce yourself and explain your connection to the Zcash grant ecosystem. You want to start, ML?
My name is Michelle Lai. I go by ML on the forums. I was on the first ZCG. At the time, we were known as the ZOMG, the Zcash Open Major Grants Committee. Since then, I've stayed involved on the forums. I come in from a enterprise crypto side of things. I used to work at Anchorage, BitPay, and Copper, but now I work in infrastructure and DeFi investing and advising.
I'm Josh Whitehart. Good to see you all. I work at ECC through tomorrow afternoon. In part of my work at ECC, we had been working with the Filecoin Foundation on a grants program where Filecoin had provided about $5 million worth of funding. And so that's kind of my connection, and independent of being just an independent community member, interested in our kind of broader grants ecosystem.
I'm Amber O'Hearn. I'm a current member of the ZCG since January, and I've been a Zcash zealot from the very beginning, but this is the first time I've been directly involved.
And I'm Aditya Bharadwaj. I lead Nighthawk Apps, an independent, non-US based team to develop, maintain infrastructure, services, and apps for the Zcash ecosystem. I have served on the ZCG committee in 2022 and have seen both the sides of the coin, writing grant proposals and evaluating them. So I'm honored to be on this panel.
And I'm Alex Bornstein. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Zcash Foundation, and I'm in charge of operations. We provide grant support or administrative support to ZCG and the minor grants program. So we provide the back-end support for all the grants that ZCG provides. This is an awesome panel filled with former grant committee members, current member, a community member, and then a grantee and a former member. So we kind of cover every single angle of the grants community at this point. So for this, the first question is in line with the theme of this year's conference, which is written. So I want to start off by considering a fundamental question. What are your thoughts on the current state of grant funding in the Zcash ecosystem? And what are some steps that we can take to improve the efficiency and impact of these programs? Michelle, would you like to start?
I think Aditya and Amber should start since they're current.
Okay, that sounds good.
And then I'll supplement based on the delta I've seen.
Okay, perfect. Amber?
Well, it's a very wide-reaching question.
It is.
I think that in general, we're doing an excellent job just based on the things that have come out, everything from wallets to technical innovations and education and everything in between. And however, of course, being a member, I can start to see where improvements could begin to go forward. And among those topics that we could elaborate on could include like the life cycle support of projects that are in flight. Evaluation, I think we could do a lot more with. The role of RFPs, and also special roles that people could take and grow further within the scope of the granting committee.
Great. Ade?
So, of course, recognizing we are just in the third year of the excellent experiment of self-governing the funding from the block rewards, right? I have a bunch of points here I want to go over the talk, but I think I would like to start with wanting to see more structure and transparency around how proposals are evaluated. So we can expand on that.
Great.
Yeah, maybe I can supplement some of the delta I've seen.
Sure.
So in the first committee, this is 2001, we were just getting off the ground. Everything was very messy. It wasn't clear who should do what. But over time, I've seen that the current committee has really taken great strides to iron out the standard process. So whatever you see today is a great improvement from what it was. And Amber sounds like she has ideas about how to make that even smoother and more transparent to grantees. I think the RFP process was also a big deal. We were struggling to get good quality grants that we really wanted to fund. And so the solution they've come up with actively is to put up RFPs for specifically what we want. And I think Aditya also joining as somebody who is a grantee and being very technical has really added to the quality of our evaluation process. So I think that has been a major step forward as well. And I think the hiring of a security lead was extremely important as well, because we, at least on the first committee, we were always not very sure about how to evaluate the quality of what was being produced. So I think these are very important things that we shouldn't take for granted. We are a relatively new grant program in the grand scheme of things. Don't forget that all your grant council members are they're part-time, they're not full-time, and this compares very differently to other grant ecosystems. So just wanted to acknowledge what has been achieved by all of you, including Alex, you and your team in collaborating with the grant committee.
Yeah, the one thing I'd like to mention as well, just to add on before we hear from you, is that we now actually have some data after some years of work, right? And so, we came into this fairly blind and the first committee did their very best, and we had some growing pains, and it took some time to kind of hit our stride. But now the current committee is doing an absolutely fantastic job. There's obvious constraints with the Treasury, with unknown future, and all the other things that we've been talking about over the last few days. And in that context, I don't think the current committee could be doing a much better job. But now that we have this data that we can look back on and say, this is what's been successful. These are the grants that have been seen through to fruition, and these are the outcomes. And that's, extremely powerful. Again, to acknowledge that we haven't had that. And so it's been so much trial and error because there was no other way to really do it. But we're entering into a new phase, I think, at this point, which is great timing. It's good timing to have this kind of conversation where we can really start to look at the future. Josh.
Yeah, I love grants. I love the whole idea behind what the community put forth as an idea, just a few years ago, and to see it progress and to see the amazing work that's been done by the team. So thank you all that have kind of served in that role in working on the Zcash community grants. I do think you're right that we need to evolve it a little bit. So at the outset, at least me as a community member, and I'm pretty sure it's in Zip 1014 as well, there was kind of an expectation with the grants program that they were major grants intended to incubate kind of new projects that would come into the ecosystem that would potentially be dev fund recipients or something like that. But they would be significant contributors to Zcash and the ecosystem over a long period of time. And I think for the most part, I think that's been the case where a lot of grants have been given that way, but not all the grants have been given that way. So the foundation had done minor grants in the past, and this was the opportunity to do major grants, and therefore that's why we allocated 8% of the total dev fund to be able to, or 8% of the total mining rewards to be able to support those grants. The majority, more than ECC and more than ZF. I think it's important that we look at the structure moving forward. So, we've talked about the dev fund. I think there's broad support, at least the folks here, that there should be a new dev fund. But I wonder with the dev fund, there's some questions is what should that dev fund support? And maybe that dev fund supports the support of the protocol and support of the things that keep Zcash working. And then the rest of the money goes to a speculative bucket that's part of a dev fund. So currently ECC and the ZF can't apply for grants, but maybe that should change. So not that any one of those organizations should receive more money than what they're receiving today. That's not what I'm advocating for. But maybe there's a certain amount of funding as an expectation, for example, of maintaining Zebra D or Zcash D and those support functions within the community. But there may be speculative things that those organizations want or can do. And so maybe the grant funding could include those types of organizations in order to look at those speculative things. And like most, if you're investing, right, you're investing, like if you're an angel investor or VC investor or that kind of thing. If we're investing in new projects to come up with the ecosystem, you need to have a portfolio, because we know that like maybe one of those, one of 20 is going to be a home run, where it's going to have a 10x, 100x return on investment. And maybe half of them are going to work out and be okay and good and deliver some good value. And then there's going to be some that fail. But you have a portfolio and you're making decisions based upon the risk that you want to take in strategic areas. And would love to see maybe a separation of some of those grants where you have a more speculative long-term focus with some of them. And then minor grants we're able to separate out from the major grants organization. To be able to support maybe shorter term things that don't necessarily have some of the upside. So I'm sure there's tons of like other ideas and better ideas and all of that, but I think that we can now start to evolve this model and get a little bit more smart about how we kind of set up the structures and manage them moving forward.
Well, I have a follow-up question for Josh, but does anybody else want to have a follow-up question or want to add to that?
Sure. So I'd like to add that I do agree the current dev fund for the community-run ZCG has worked better for the short milestone and shorter grants. Like the funding is released for specific milestones reached and kind of not been able to reach the vision of the set in the 1014 zip, right? We wanted ongoing development of teams dedicated to Zcash to introduce more decentralization. So definitely I do want to touch back on the efficiency aspect of that as well, which is like you brought up that currently the ZCG is quite time constrained, and that also causes shortcomings and communication and all kinds of things happen. So I would like to see efficiency in terms of not having an open application process, which is sudden surprises of this grant or that grant, and it's just causes different kinds of things happening, right? So this is something I don't see other cryptocurrencies doing. They have like a time period of a couple of weeks or months or every quarter that they accept grants, and then they have a procedure to evaluate it, and then they share the results. Adding to that, there's also a perspective of retrospective. So we as a community should be able to talk about what went well with the grant, what didn't go well, and how we can improve it without attacking the builders. So yeah, that's around the efficiency aspect and improving the proposal and grant application process.
So with efficiency, what if we took rather than have the ZCG be more efficient on our org, what if we took that back out to the community and we did Gitcoin style grants where you can submit your idea to the community and use quadratic funding mechanisms to be able to fund those grants. So ultimately the community can start to participate in all this. So if they're beneath a certain threshold, it's like not within ZCG or like ZCG purview. It's like, this is a smaller thing. It's a speculative thing. It's $50,000. It's $100,000. It's an educational video. It may be a community event or something like that. You put it up on Gitcoin, you let the community vote with their ZEC. And ultimately, and there could be matching. So that's part of the idea with the quadratic funding is maybe there's a grant funding available to put to community things. So if you put up your grant, that grant community automatically put up a certain threshold if it's matched or exceeded, and then the community votes with their ZEC. And then the grant committee doesn't have to even vet or think.
Yeah, that would work great for the short-term grants again. So I do support that idea. We can have a Gitcoin-style quadratic funding for shorter milestone-based grants, and then maybe the ZCG committee can focus on working closely with the long-term participants.
Yeah, I do think there's an inherent tension between the wanting to introduce a lot of new people and let new people try new ideas and let the community identify gaps in things that we need to be developed on the one hand, and then having these core functions that need to be maintained, and the value is lost if we spend a lot of money to build a system and then just let it decay. So having a separation between those two could be very useful, and also it might provide a kind of proving ground, because it's very difficult to evaluate a team who's suggesting something that's a very large, protracted in time project, even if it's very good, how do we know that after the first milestone, they might not discover that it's more difficult than they thought that they could deal with? So having smaller sort of telescoping projects separated from core functionality might be useful.
Yeah. Do you have anything, Tad, Michelle?
I do, but it's digressing a little. Do you want to keep going? Then I'll come back.
Well, I'd like to make then 2 quick points. So one on what Adi was saying, there is a lot to be learned from traditional grant funding, from foundations, family foundations. There's an entire grant-making world outside of crypto that's been around for many decades that there's various funding models which could be applied, including what you mentioned as far as, time, every 4 months, there's a new grant period and that's when they're evaluated. So I do think we could do a lot more looking outside of how we've traditionally looked at grants in this community. We could learn quite a bit. The other point I wanted to make, just in response to the first comment you were making, Josh, is that it's worth noting for those that don't know. So ZCG is a committee underneath the Zcash Foundation. And so they have independent decision-making authority, but all of the administrative burden or tasks are on ZF. So when you were talking about the reason why the ECC and ZF can't receive grants is partially because of that scenario, that situation. So are you suggesting that ZCG, in what you initially suggested, that ZCG would move out from underneath and become an independent entity, or were you thinking of it in a different way?
Oh yeah, I'm a big advocate for it being an independent entity. And I understand that adds maybe some cost and complexity of having an independent entity versus folding to the Zcash Foundation. But ultimately, I think it's good for the long-term decentralization. The more organizations that we can spawn off that are operating independently or able to. And I understand, like the Zcash Foundation, how you have your own constraints as a US-based 501c3. Which, like, for example, we had some issues where like an anon can't necessarily apply for a grant, but maybe through something like an external mechanism, there's some other mechanisms to allow for people in different parts of the world to be able to participate in these kinds of grant programs. One other point, like as it relates to efficiency and the size, like we have, like if you guys weren't aware, there's a Filecoin grant program that it was a agreement negotiated between ECC and Filecoin, and so that's managed separately. That's managed by ECC, and there's a representative from Filecoin/Protocol Labs that would kind of vet these grants that come in. Like I'm happy to announce we have allocated 100% of our grants within less than a year. I can't tell you all the details of that yet, but there were 2. But I will say one that we'll announce, which I'm super, super excited about. Sorry if I'm saying too much, Chris, but I'm very excited. It will get announced in the coming weeks to months, I think. But that particular grant took 14 months to pull together, actually. So the start of it, the genesis of it was some outreach and relationship building that took place between various parties. And then it was a lot of iteration on what is the scope, what's an appropriate scope, is everybody happy, is Filecoin happy, is this other third party happy, is ECC happy with the scope and the timelines and the deliverables. So that's very hard when you have ZCG as a volunteer-based, effectively part-time organization to be able to pull off kind of the nurturing of those style grants. So I'd love to be able to see, it's a very long answer to your question, I'd love to be able to see ZCG split off and have some more dedicated full-time support to be able to really steward this money towards some of these more impactful things.
My point of digression was actually about this. There were actually 2 parts of his response, right? One was about splitting into major and minor type of review, and the other was about ECC and ZF being able to apply. And I thought that one struck a chord, because when I was on the panel, and I believe to some extent, with the current panel too, it may be hard at all points of time to have a really great assortment of projects to choose from. And it's possible and perhaps this has even happened in the past 2-3 years since we've been established, that the best thing to invest in is not, some random application, but perhaps something that's on ZF or ECC's list of priorities, but not quite the top, but they would like some extra funding to make what they're already working on so much better or so much faster. And so I think that's worthwhile to consider. It's not ideal. We will have to restructure to make this legally viable. But I think we're at a point, and we all acknowledge this, that we're in survival mode. And I think survival requires adaptation. If we don't adapt, one day perhaps we'll be dodo coin, right? I think it's really important to think about what we're trying to protect now.
So I would like to add to the survival mode point. I think that goes back to the efficiency. I think this is something we really failed as at least my committee. When I started in Jan 2022, we had a combined treasury of $26 million, which reduced to around $3 million towards the end of the year. So we kind of failed to hedge. So I think even though we are in the bear market now with the $30 ZAC, we should still consider proactively hedging some ZAC in case things get even worse. So
sure. I think my comment is not for kind of current situation. We do have to set it up to work at different coin prices. With the current treasury, it may not be feasible to be expecting a large grant from the ZCG, but we do need, I think, to set up our approaches or possibilities such for the maximization of cross Zcash ecosystem benefit, which includes making sure that these orgs have the ability to pick low-hanging fruit if given extra resources.
Right. I mean, we still have funded large grants this year at a low ZAC price, and we still only hedge those coins when the grants are approved. So all I'm saying is, for the future, for the next 12 to 18 months, till the next dev fund discussions happen, wherever we go, if we do want to maintain teams' ongoing contributions till the next dev fund, if we do hedge some amount, that might be a safe move.
I think it relates to the split off idea as to how much control or how much thought process the ZCG is putting into the ongoing processes. When I first heard the idea of splitting off, I thought that's a terrible idea because it's already enough to review the grants. I think even before I started, I had not as much appreciation as I do now of the breadth of knowledge that one has to have when any submission comes in to try to evaluate the impact that it could potentially have, and as well as the technical details if it's technical. So there's a lot going on just in the review process by itself. But then as I deliberated on it further, I thought, and especially I think as we've taken on these special roles with the code auditor, with the outreach coordinator, and now with the community wallet developer, and it seems like these are prototypes for sort of expanding on ways that the ZCG needs to be thinking about its own operation and supporting itself in ways that are a lot larger than just having, the Zcash Foundation is providing an enormous amount of support, and that's intimidating, but there's more that we could do if we had our own sort of governance.
Yeah, I'd like to add some thoughts to this as well, which is I think we've talked a lot in the last couple of days about decentralization in the protocol, and to me, the easiest step for decentralization would be an independent grants committee or grants organization that was domiciled outside of the United States. I think the reality is more challenging than that. If treasuries were at what they were a year or a year and a half ago, I think it would be an absolute no-brainer and something that we wouldn't even really be debatable at this point. It would be a step to take. But having looked at the numbers and knowing, I've been in every ZCG meeting I think in the last 2 years, just about every public meeting, and so I know exactly what goes into a lot of the work that everybody does, and it's enormous. And I obviously know the work my team puts into this, which is a huge part of what we do and does, to be fully honest, take away from other things we could be doing within to move ZF forward and support ZF operations. But the treasury piece of it can't be ignored. It's a huge part of it, and being independent would be extremely. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to start up. It's a lot of money to maintain, because the administrative side has a knowledge level and requirement that is no less than the technical grant evaluation side. And not to overstate it, that there are ways that it could start small and grow, but like ML initially said, we're in survival mode, and to start over, to literally start over at a time when we're struggling to move forward, might not be the best timing.
Right, it feels
to sap everything.
anti-efficient.
Yeah, exactly. To go back to the original question.
Would it be similarly kind of legally dangerous to allow just the ECC to apply? Because I understand, obviously, ZF administers the ZCG, then applying for a grant, that's weird. But if ECC is separate, would that be a problem?
I wouldn't answer the legal part of it on stage like this, but what I would say is that it would set up a situation where a committee underneath, ZF is then giving money to or potentially granting money to ECC is maybe not the best situation for relations and other. It's just not ideal by any stretch. So yeah, I think it's more the possible conflict it would create that I would be concerned about. But there's other things, like one we announced yesterday that we've created this organization in Cayman, which is obviously an offshore organization. Possibly one step, and this is not something we've discussed, I'm just throwing this out here, would be to move ZCG in its current form, under that organization, which would take care of one part of it, but it's a half measure, maybe leading to a full measure in the future if we, when we survive, when we thrive again, then it would be time, to fully break that connection, possibly, one possible outcome.
Add a note about the ECC. We did actually, at ZCG, they funded several of ex-ZCC members, right? So various types, but they had to leave the ECC for that roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So any on the efficiency impact part of this? Okay, I thought that might take some time, and I was right. So let's kind of move the conversation, but kind of still focus on this geographic thought. So what actions can be taken to expand the geographic reach of the Zcash funding ecosystem? Before we started up here today, we were talking about how great it is to hear from all parts of the world over this past morning. There's so many cool projects going on. There's so many interesting things happening within the protocol outside of the United States. So what can we do in all of our various roles to help prop up and support those entities, those individuals through grants?
I think so. To start with, the current ZCG is majority US based, and that makes it a bit difficult to evaluate international proposals that I've seen. We tend to start with the assumption, unfortunately, that hey, this outside group might be requesting too much money based on their location of where they're living. But the crypto has changed the landscape. The rates people ask around the world have been matched or exceeded the US-based rates in dollar terms. So I think that's first notion we have to draw. And then the second thing I would like to talk about is I learned that just yesterday that someone from Filecoin actually went to meet their community in Ghana. So I think that was pretty bold and great for their community to connect with their local user base. While we don't have that, we haven't done anything in Africa, even though we have a lot of active users, at least seen in social media. So maybe someone can do a job and check if those people are real, and maybe we should pursue funding projects there.
One thing to quickly add to that is that we created Zcon Voices in part to go to where these other communities are. So we started with Brazil because there's such a huge, passionate, functioning group in Brazil. Our dream, again, talking about treasury, would be Zcon Nigeria or Zcon Kenya, somewhere within Africa. That is absolutely what we would love to do next, if we're able to, for that very reason. You have to go to where communities are, you have to show your face, you have to have in-person conversations, and then and get a feel for what's possible, what the potential really is,
Right.
and not base your thoughts on assumptions or even just what you're getting in as far as grants go. Because again, one huge constraint of ZCG is that for the most part, because of resource constraints, you're waiting for people to come to you. And that's really challenging when you're waiting for communities who, might not always feel heard, might not always feel like they're going to get, the fair chance that they should through no experience with us specifically necessarily, but just in general. You need to go create that trust. You need to start a relationship, exactly like you're saying, Adi.
We need to, in addition to that, I mean, we need to reduce friction. I mean, we need to be honest, right? This stuff is too hard to use still. People don't have it in their own language. In some cases, people they struggle to read and write. And so, what does that mean in terms of the user experience? And are we building the tools that allow some of these communities to really kind of thrive and to educate and to take this out? Or are we creating barriers because they try it, and it doesn't work, and they don't understand why it doesn't work, and they don't understand why balance isn't showing up, and they don't understand what sync means? It's too hard. And we also, like ECC had partnered with Gitcoin some years ago, and we ran a hackathon. And we had people come in from all over the world to try to participate in the hackathon, and it sucked. Why did it suck? Because the developer tooling sucked, right? Because people couldn't easily build on top of Zcash. It wasn't even so we can go out and try to understand. But I come from a certain context within the US. And so my context and what I understand is one thing. Somebody else, like our friends in Brazil, are in a different context with different needs, and maybe there's similar needs and there's similar core kind of ideology, but they have unique insight into the needs of the Brazilian people that I just don't have, and I'll never completely understand. So how do we remove the friction to allow people in Brazil to build the solutions for Brazil on top of the platform? We need to improve documentation. Like Taylor's called this out multiple times. We need to improve developer documentation. We need to improve the SDKs, tools that people can use so that they can actually use technology to be able to support their needs in their own context. I'd love to be able to see grants that go to support those folks to be able to build better. But we as core protocol developers and the putting that out there have to do a better job of making it easy.
Completely agree on that point. It's about prioritizing the right tech that we need, documentation, wallet state syncing, the fact that the wallets work around the world, and then going on from there before funding other initiatives.
Yeah, I remember when I first started having wallet sync issues, the only reason anyone could answer my question is because I could text the people building the wallets. I think we do need to improve our communication to help people understand what on earth is happening from different angles. I think the original question that was asked that led to this kind of geographic diversification question was about certain projects in certain parts of the world that feel like they're not getting enough attention. They've applied, but presumably they've been denied. And I would just suggest to anyone watching who may have similar questions, put yourselves in the shoes of the people on the grant panel. We're not simply looking to, allocate money to whomever asks for money for some wonderful marketing campaign. We're thinking about the ROI on every grant. So if you can show that you commit to, with the first tranche, you have certain results, certain usage, certain users, then it becomes an easier conversation when they are discussing internally. So I just encourage you to put yourselves in the shoes of somebody on the panel having a responsibility to effectively give out grants. Marketing grants are not necessarily always well written because it tends to be a little bit amorphous in terms of what benefits come back to the Zcash ecosystem.
Excellent point. I agree with what you said too, Josh. I would add to it that understanding use cases instead of making assumptions on use cases. I think that's a huge thing. And again, it goes back to listening and having an open communication channel with individuals and communities in different geographic areas. And I think, again, using Brazil as an example, we now have this incredible base of passionate users there who we have created these amazing communication links with. And so, it's on us and it's on our friends in Brazil to work together to really start to ratchet that up and grow it and understand, what can we build to help increase adoption there? What can we build to help increase development and tap into use cases that we've all talked about for a long time? We all know the potential use cases, and we're all interested in them, but we haven't seen any of those really come to fruition in the places where they were needed most. And I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions on that. And it does come back. It starts with communication and a real understanding and listening to what is really needed.
And communication comes with open channels, right? And then again, that feeds into the time and efficiency. Do you have enough time to get that communication going? Enough time for retrospectives on certain programs?
Yep. Time to even learn, to learn from things, because you can sit down and you can say,
Right.
What did we learn from this? Absolutely. Any other comments on this question?
Yeah, I just want to add to ML's point about if you're a stranger to the community and the grant committee is trying to figure out what kind of value you might be adding so that we can decide whether or not to allocate funds. One way that you can begin to develop a reputation is to look at, for example, ZecHub or Free2Z and just participate in the community conversation so that you begin to understand what other people are doing and where your contributions might be best made.
Awesome. Well, I want to make sure we have time for kind of closing comments, but maybe really kind of quickly we can just talk about this last question, which is how can Zcash ecosystems grant programs further contribute to decentralization within the protocol? We've obviously discussed the very obvious one, but does anybody have others to add to that?
The obvious one being disconnecting from CF, or is that what you mean?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was my comment, that I think it's the lowest hanging fruit of decentralization. Yes.
Yes, to decentralize away from ZF as its own independent body, and engaging with the community that way. And then again, I think my personal belief is that organization should focus on building and incubating larger projects. So I think it is a great example of their potential. Now, it's a lot of money that's been given to Kedit, and I think it's still to be determined, right? Because they're still working to roll something out, if that bet is worth it. But that's the kind of bet. Like, we've had others, and it's not to criticize our kind of former folks that had worked on Tor with Artie, right? So that was given $1.3 million. It's a significant amount of money. It's unclear to me how that is ever going to be a kind of a long-term benefit to the Zcash community. I'd rather see that kind of money go to organizations that are committed on a longer term through the Zcash community grants piece, but it's going to take a lot of work and maybe more time than they currently have available today.
Well, there's another inherent tension there, because if you're a team that wants to do something with a big goal and aspiration, you really need to be able to dedicate a lot of time and hire employees who are willing to commit for a long time. And so if you don't know in advance how much granting you're going to get, then it could be hard to commit to making something. But on the other hand, as the granting committee, we don't want to make a large commitment until we've seen that the process is starting to move forward. And I'm not quite sure the best way to get over that from both sides.
So what if it's like, because the ZCG has done this maybe, and maybe you have good examples of where they've done it, but you incubate those things, right? If somebody does a pilot or proof of concept and we're gonna say we're gonna fund 50K, the goal is that we're actually gonna fund $1 million. And if it's just a 50K project, it's actually not probably worth it, or it's likely not gonna have the same level of impact. So we're gonna fund 50K for a pilot to prove that out. There's some kind of delivery mechanism, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then maybe they have some longer term, bigger funding.
Is that not what has happened?
So that's nice from the ZCG side, but then
Yeah.
on the team that wants to do it, how are they going to find people who are committed if they can't give them a promise that they'll be employed?
No, I totally get that, but that's also kind of a startup mentality, right? So like having kind of grown up in the startup world and played that game, like funding is never inevitable, and you've got to go earn that next funding. So you can't like I can go, especially if I'm trying to bootstrap it or get it seed, then you have employees that may be taking less money, they're taking more risk because they believe in the thing or they have an anticipation of some further
That's
upside.
actually what we did on the first panel. We were quite insistent. Zcash Media is one example. They've gotten a lot of money now, but back then they applied for the same amount. We said no. So I wonder what the process is like right now. Are we pushing back on kind of staging and tiering?
Well, right now, the situation with the funding is one of the major constraints, and it makes us more reluctant to commit to larger projects. And we've had some situations where we've done a kind of research phase to look into the details or design of what a project would entail before going any further.
Okay.
So any other comments on decentralization before we wrap up?
Yeah, so for me, decentralization for protocol means the actual protocol as to how many developers are actually making pull requests to the core clients, Zcash and ZebraD. And I would like to see more teams. We do have Gedit now, and it's about how do we attract more cryptographers and developers to start contributing to the consensus and start taking part in the conversations about what do we see the future for Zcash with the proof of stake and or keeping it as proof of work, the emission curve, the coin issuance, all that kind of stuff.
There's maybe one more, and it's maybe similar to what we did with Filecoin. So the Filecoin ECC grants program was Filecoin funded. And so are there things, like one of the things that we've talked about within the Zcash community is like, for example, all the amazing scientific work that gets done within this community and then other projects use, which is awesome. It's great that we're providing that benefit. But are there mechanisms where we can engage those other communities to bring more grant dollars into the Zcash community by kind of getting away from just the pure Zcash? So the thing with Filecoin grant is it needed to be inclusive of both. So it needed to benefit the Filecoin community and it needed to benefit the Zcash community. Maybe there's more opportunities. There's some deep, there's some treasuries out there that are just unbelievably deep and looking for also places to grant fund. And there might be an interesting way to create some intersections if somebody's reaching out or engaging with some of those other kind of foundations or community groups.
Well, so maybe starting with ML and just working this way, just final thoughts as we wrap up this panel. I feel like we could talk about this for another hour or two.
Yeah, just two. And the first one is, I think we're all trying our best to evolve. And since the last time we discussed, I think we've evolved in great directions. We've made great progress. I expect next year, as we continue to struggle, we will struggle better. We'll be at a better point, I'm confident, given what I've seen. I also wanted to give a shout out to Han. He is our one-man rocket ship. And we're really happy to have you in the community, to have people who really care and are really good. So we'd love to find more Hans.
Josh?
Hey, man, I don't have any further thoughts. We'll just
Amber, go ahead.
I also agree that we could go on for a very long time. I think one of the things that Addie brought up that we should look into further is about the idea of having grants come in with a deadline or maybe a window so that we have time to compare them. And I think this is especially important during times when the budget is more strained. And I guess more largely, think of ways to be more adaptable to the value of the coin, because when we start out, say at the beginning of the year, and we're kind of projecting what we'll be able to do, it may not be true 3 months later, and that's been hard to adapt to.
Great, Adi?
Yeah, agree. It has to be, I'll touch my point back on the transparency and formal structure of the grant review process and retrospectives. It is no fun as a grant applicant to send in your proposal after you worked on it for so long and then just being delayed for 6 to 7 weeks, and you have other grants being front run before that, and then being told that we don't have money for you. So I think formal structure, more transparency around what decisions were taken, what was the criteria applied, how much money was paid for each team member, and such might help reduce contentious things happening.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say to wrap up that, we have so many huge things to talk about in this community. There are so many big decisions that need to be made, and I feel like this area is somewhere we can come together on, and we can really, use as a way to spring forward and start this next phase, because we all want the same thing. We all want this to go in a direction that it's supportive and grows the community, grows the ecosystem, and maybe this is an area for common ground where we can really sit down and say, this is what we've learned, this is how we're going to apply it, this is what's coming next, and we use it to hopefully filter into all the other conversations and things that need to get done in a pretty short time frame. That started, right around now. So I just want to say thank you to you all. This was amazing. Wish we could keep going, but it's time to wrap it up.
And Daniel and Danica, who have been great supports to the ZCG.
Absolutely. All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome job, guys. Thanks. Fantastic.
Comecei ali com o X fazendo uma moderaçãozinha e tal, e hoje eu consigo trabalhar para eles. Ok. Pô, até esqueci o que eu ia falar. Pô, é minha primeira vez, peço paciência. Mas é isso. Pode ir.
Não, tranquilo. O Rodrigão é um cara muito bacana que acho que demonstra bem os espaços que tem na Web3 e nas comunidades, né, de você realmente ajudar a construir esse ecossistema maravilhoso que só cresce. E o Rodrigo começou como voluntário e acabou entrando para o time oficial da Conhex, então, bem bacana. E hoje aqui no nosso painel, sem mais delongas, nós vamos falar sobre DEX versus SEX e a importância da privacidade. Pode passar, por favor. Tá, então, brevemente, acho que todo mundo aqui já sabe o que é uma corretora centralizada, né, uma descentralizada, mas só contextualizando, uma corretora centralizada é uma plataforma onde você consegue acessar e fazer negociações de cripto. A gente colocou alguns nomes aqui das mais conhecidas, né, que já são bem estabelecidas no mercado. A Conhex faz parte do grupo Via BTC, que eu e o Rodrigo representa diretamente. A Binance, Coinbase, mercado Bitcoin e as corretoras descentralizadas que têm crescido e tomando espaço cada vez mais no mercado, né? Então, aqui a gente entrando um pouquinho mais já no comparativo da SEX versus a DEX, que tem um processo de abertura de conta, primeiramente de uma SEX, né? Então, você vai abrir a conta, você vai ter que fazer o seu cadastro de e-mail e senha ali. Passando por esse processo, você vai ter que fazer o KYC, que é um processo que a Zcash vem aí totalmente contra, né? E depois você faz o depósito, você consegue fazer as negociações. Já embaixo, para você utilizar uma DEX, você tem a criação de uma carteira. Após você criar a carteira, você colocando ali algum saldo de cripto, né? Você fazendo o depósito, você consegue fazer negociação. Só que é interessante, um ponto aqui que na DEX você realmente está usufruindo ali, exercendo de fato os fundamentos que o Satoshi Nakamoto trouxe para a gente, né, de realmente nós sermos o nosso próprio banco. Então, todas essas responsabilidades aqui da criação de carteira fica por responsabilidade do usuário mesmo, e enquanto isso na SEX, essas responsabilidades elas são terceirizadas, né, as pessoas acabam deixando isto na mão da corporação que ele confia, no caso das corretoras que a gente citou anteriormente. Então, aqui é uma interface de uma corretora centralizada. Apesar de ser uma imagem, né, uma interface que a primeira vez que você entra numa plataforma dessa se assusta, ainda assim ela
Between the eyes of love, I call your name. Behind those guarded walls, I used to go. Upon a summer wind, there's a certain melody takes me back to the place that I know. Down on the beach, yeah, yeah. Down on the beach, yeah, yeah. The secrets of the summer I will keep. The sands of time will blow away mystery. No one but you and I, underneath that moonlit sky, take me back to the place that I know. On the beach. Forever in my dreams, my heart will be hanging on to this sweet memory. A day of strange desire and a night that burned like fire. Take me back to the place that I know. On the beach, yeah, yeah. Down on the beach, yeah, yeah. Down on the beach, yeah, yeah.
Okay. 10 seconds. I'm going to look for a thumbs up from the back of the room to tell me that we're ready to go. Are we good to go? Thumbs up? Yeah? Okay, cool. Okay, welcome to our second town hall of Zcon4. last year the town hall was such a popular and well-watched recording subsequently on YouTube that we thought we would have double the fun this year. So yesterday we had a sort of non-technical town hall focused on funding and governance issues. Today we're going to have a more technically focused town hall with representatives from across the ecosystem: ECC, myself and Andrew from ZF, John from Kedit, Ying Tong, who's been doing research into programmability, Taylor, who's our security expert at large in the ecosystem, Strad and Nate from ECC. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew, who's going to chair this this panel in this town hall, and we'll get going.
Superb. All right, let's do it. That spared us a kind of short, awkward introduction, so thank you very much for that. We can go straight into questions. The first batch of questions I have will be kind of, we'll have someone on the panel that is like mostly directed at, but we can all, you know, riff and build on that, and some more open ones. These are all on the kind of topic of, you know, roadmap planning for Zcash in the future. The first topic we'll start with is ZSAs, and so this is maybe most directed at you, Jonathan. And the questions: you describe the roadmap towards the deployment of ZSAs.
Right. I guess the roadmap towards deployment starts with the end of the roadmap towards finishing developing, you know, the first alpha. So we have now achieved a state of development and synchronization with the rest of the teams, where there's a testnet, a small testnet that can be used to see how to issue and transfer assets, move assets around. That was a lot of work on the circuit size and circuit side, and required quite a lot of effort. There is still a missing piece there that we need to discuss: the fees of ZSAs. We actually skipped that implementation because we realized that we need to form a consensus with the ecosystem on which fees structure to implement for ZSA. So we are going to implement, and that's our first, let's say, milestone here. We are going to implement the most straightforward one, but I'm expecting iterations on this piece. In order to go to production, we have started working on bringing the code closer to NU6, so that we can have this fairly large branch integrated to the main Zcash and then deployed. That's yet another. This is very intensive work. To give you an example, the extensive list of items that ECC has been working on in this past year, it goes towards closing bugs and dealing with this live system, but it also changes a lot of the underlying code that we've been using to build ZSA, and just catching up on that and being aligned with the latest is going to take time. But if I skip ahead a little bit where we're going, I think we'll start to see first users of ZSA, like in its let's say alpha form, but in these coming months, we'll start to be answering requests on how to use it, and maybe feedback on things that could be evolved already in the next few months. And then further down, prepare for the actual deployment. In parallel, we're building the big feature that is really needed by most use cases, which is asset swaps. So we have those two efforts, merging this and making sure that two assets can be exchanged simultaneously. I think we had a few conversations of that about that in previous Zcon and also in this one. So quite a lot of functionality that's going to be, in one day added into the protocol. I think most people also want to know when is this actually live, and that
would be great. Yeah.
That is probably me asking the same questions to the people around. So
I have several ideas of a follow-up question, but you're all welcome to chime in too. I'm glad that you brought up the fee thing as an example. I was going to ask kind of what do you think the community should be providing input on, or in general, what do you think should be done to help you the most as possible? I think you gave that as like an example of something that we should be coming to consensus on. So that's a good example. Are there others?
If there are, we've already been approached by people that are waiting for ZSA to be deployed to use it for their applications. So there's teams looking at stable coins, there's teams looking at bridges. And so this is useful for us because it informs who are going to be the first users and where should we put, who are we going to be assisting first? And possibly not needing to assist. Maybe it works, out of the box without any change. Usually you do have to be around. But if people are already seeing what they could be doing with ZSA, we want to hear, and we can already start doing, bringing you the alpha tools and helping you hold this, so that you can see what you would be doing with this next. This is, by the way, the result of a dedicated team of engineers. They're all sitting here, and I really want to thank their effort.
Any of said engineers want to react? Go ahead.
I have a question. For the testnet, is there a user experience for issuing and transferring?
For now, the initial way to test this is to spin, your own set of nodes. You're actually going to have a demo from Vivek, I think tomorrow.
Oh, awesome.
Is it tomorrow? Tomorrow.
Yeah.
On all the steps you need. I've asked, so it's not going to come as a surprise. I've asked Vivek to do the talk in a way that if I point my AI agent to it, it could do the steps and launch a node. I haven't tried, but that's my goal. It should be following, line by line, copy paste in your terminal, and you'll get the issuance and transfer.
I feel like Strad, you might have any, some reaction.
The biggest step, as you mentioned, the biggest next step is getting it into a main full node base. Something that we've been trying to do, although this is something that is going to need to be proven out with other teams, is making it easier for these kinds of larger scale developments to be done more easily on the main code base rather than needing to live in a very long persistent fork. Because as you're finding, it's the integration phase does add extra time and technical resources in there. So definitely learnings from this we should be collecting up and using for subsequent efforts that other people are going to do, because it's sort of the first big major change coming in from a second contributing organization. Yeah, I have, having not seen a PR yet, I will not be able to comment on how long that will take to get in. Beyond that, it will be the usual, get it into somewhere where we can test it and audit it. I'm quite interested to get it up on the main Zcash testnet at our earliest convenience. But yeah, it should be something that is, once we're in, the pathway past that point should be relatively straightforward. The big bit is the very giant PR that's probably going to have thousands of lines to review.
Sounds like you're looking forward to it. Yeah.
Oh, it's fun. Maintenance is fun. It has its own perks.
I just want to highlight as well that you talk about getting into testnet. There has been conversations about having multiple testnets and for making it possible to spin up new testnets for specific purposes, like developing a specific feature. And this is the sort of unsexy, uninteresting, boring work that node developers need to look at doing in order to make it possible for other organizations to start being able to easily contribute. Because at the moment, you're having to spin up, you're having to customize your own testnet.
Yeah.
As and when we add ZSAs to a testnet, we also still want to have a testnet available for people to do testing on a reflection of the live mainnet. So this is just to highlight that it's not just the work that Kedit is doing. There is also work from ECC and ultimately ZF to start making it easier for third parties to start integrating this sort of stuff into Zcash.
Yeah, and the other aspect that makes this kind of change pretty tricky is that it's very vertical in that it touches like, what is it, four code bases, I think, possibly 5, definitely 4, in terms of where the changes need to be. So some focused, like it would be good to do like a meta review of how this process has been, and I've got some ideas for how we could more easily thread things through as we go for these larger projects that we have already sort of collective buy-in that like we want this to happen. It's just going to have to happen somehow. Feature flagging off Rust code and tying those into Zcash and ZebraD main features and just like adding some more, I guess, structure to the way in which the various organizations involved in this collaborate and cross review and cross work for these sort of big feature things that while one organization might be sort of the lead on development, they still touch on everyone who in the ecosystem who needs to respond to those changes.
It needs to start being a very collaborative effort going forward.
How many testnets do you think we'll end up having? I mean, one concept that I've learned kind of recently is how Polkadot does testing. They have a notion of like a staging chain, which is like a little bit like a testnet plus. And, we're used to blockchains having kind of the mainnet, the testnet, but there could clearly be room for multiple testnets with different purposes. I think that's interesting.
I think we should make it possible for anybody to create their own testnet. I think we should make it possible for anybody what is a network at the end of the day? It's a magic number and it's a set of DNS seeders. So I think we should make it possible for anybody to pick a magic number that doesn't conflict with any other ones and spin up their own DNS seeder and to spin up their own testnet to do whatever testing they want. And if they want to, make it a hostile environment, like Ziggurat might want to spin up one where there's a very hostile environment or very high traffic or whatever, then they can. We can have a sort of official testnet that reflects mainnet. It's exactly the same as mainnet, so people can test their software just prior to deployment. We can have other testnets that test new features like ZSAs or moving away from proof of work, and just make it possible for anybody. And that way we don't have to worry about how many should we have. You can have as many as you want.
One challenge with this testnet is we also want to verify backwards compatibility and that regular ZEC transactions work well and didn't degrade. So but at the same time, to participate in this testnet, you need to use new wallets that implement the functionality that we've added. So it's a bit for now we're kind of playing all those roles. We launched the testnet and we pretend to be all the sides, and it's really like very recently achieved to this alpha stage. But as we add more participants, we will need to figure out how to also test the interaction between ZSA and regular ZEC transactions.
And another benefit of having a testnet as opposed to just locally testing your changes is that third-party participants can also join. Like, I think Penumbra, they're very much in the testnet phase, and they release testnets very frequently, like one every few weeks or something. I think they're on like 37 now, something like that.
They're all running. They don't turn off the previous one.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea is rapid iteration so that people interested in building apps on Penumbra can all join in. And for ZSAs, like John mentioned, a lot of the use cases would be bridges or things like stable coins that would very likely involve participation from like an existing stablecoin on another chain. Or for example, I know the Anoma people have proposed a Zcash to Anoma bridge. So yeah, they could also just start experimenting on the testnet. Yeah, I think for ZSAs in particular, making it available to these third-party collaborators would be essential.
Yeah, and they announced we're going to destroy all the assets. This testnet is shutting down, and the next one is starting, so people can wrap up their experiments and start it.
I think so. Yeah.
Another use case I hope to see would be wallet developers, like integrating ZSAs early.
Yeah, so all of these can already start, knocking on our door and seeing what the tools can do. But once there's a more open testnet for everybody to play, they don't need to knock on anyone's door. They just point their software to that node, and it works.
I'm pretty excited to see people's reaction to this alpha demo. I'm pretty excited for that. Let's move on from ZSAs for a bit to proof of work and transition towards proof of stake and or something that's non-proof of work. It's kind of directed at you, Nathan. I thought you might recap your hybrid proof of work and proof of stake kind of proposal, and then the question beyond that, the question I have written here is what's the time scale? So again, a date's welcomed, but not holding you to it.
Yeah, okay, so I just gave a presentation about this design approach called trailing finality layer. It's really early, so it's kind of a design brainstorm. But the idea behind it is, can we sort of like introduce proof of stake to the existing network while minimizing disruption to the existing network? So the existing like mining system would still operate, the nodes would be as unchanged as possible, and there would be minimum impact to use cases, like wallets should function without change. I don't know how feasible this approach is, so there's still lots of open questions, and there's also like potential alternative approaches. So answering the timeline piece is really tricky, especially because I think there's different groups working on different potential features for the Zcash protocol, and they're going to interact. So for example, for proof of stake, I'm a fan of building in like liquid staking into the protocol. And the argument would be, if we don't build it into the protocol, third parties might introduce their own products, and they might be centralized. So it might be like a Coinbase or whoever. And then if that's a popular product, they end up sort of centralizing a lot of small scale users who get this extra benefit if they're using Coinbase instead of just the base protocol. So that would be an argument for including it. But if you need to include that, you need more than one asset. So if the proof of stake protocol is going to have built-in liquid staking, then we would need ZSAs, right? So there's these potential interdependencies. Another big one is for bridging, we might want finality. For proof of stake, a lot of proof of stake protocols have finality. So I'm really feeling like what could be helpful with multiple teams is if we can start to build out like a diagram of potential upgrades and how they depend on each other and who's like working on them. And it would be really cool if it could also somehow help us encompass and visualize different alternatives. So like, oh, you know, if we have proof of stake that doesn't require multi-assets, it would go in this direction. If it does require multi-assets, then it's going to depend on ZSAs. So that's my messy answer, which does not have a timeline.
The multi-asset, is that, I'm not fully familiar there. Is that where you get like staked asset of the asset?
Oh, yeah. So liquid staking, if you're not familiar, is like, let's say you have a proof of stake protocol that doesn't have liquid staking. So you can just post Zec to become a validator or a staking provider, and you earn a return for doing that. But you've posted your Zec, so you can't access it. Well, what if you know, you have 10 Zec and a company like Coinbase? I don't know if they maybe have run into like regulatory trouble doing things like this, but in the past they have done things like this. They say, hey, Zcash users, if you send 10 Zec to us, we will stake for you and we'll give you 10 Coinbase Zcash bucks. And you can use those. You can like buy stuff with them or whatever. And then later, if anyone brings us 10 Coinbase Zcash bucks, they can redeem them. And they're sort of managing that. So that is basically a central institution offering this financial product that makes it more appealing to stake. So in practice, like protocols that do that. Yeah, so if you're going to do that, you want to have multiple wrapped tokens created by different issuers who are somehow like pooling staking or something like that.
So the multiple asset piece here is still to allow different actors to be the people giving you a virtual Zex.
Yeah.
But that's virtual Zex is
a key idea. I mean, a proof of stake doesn't necessarily have to have slashing. Of course, many do. Ethereum has slashing. Ethereum doesn't have built-in liquid staking, but that's added on by these external third parties. But the liquid staking asset can still be slashed. So I mean, you can over a long time period withdraw from the staked asset to the plain normal one, no longer slashable when you're not out of it. But yeah, so the rules, like the slashable asset is very different than the non-slashable asset. So at a minimum, you would need, I think, a one bit, different asset type, even if nothing at all else.
Right. So just coming back to the timeline for proof of stake, so there's these, big design questions, and there's also road mapping questions, because we might decide, oh, we could transition to a simpler form of proof of stake that doesn't have that built in, and then add it in a subsequent step. And if we choose to do that, then maybe we unbundle the first step from ZSAs, we can do them in parallel or not. And doing that kind of planning across organizations it's a good problem to have. Like, it's really good that we have multiple teams, and figuring out what the roadmap is a tricky problem. That's a good thing, and we got to figure out how to do it. So yeah, I just have this vision of like, can we make it just a diagram of potential upgrades? There's boxes, and each one is like a potential improvement, and try to start mapping out how do they depend on each other, and which direction should we go? What is the community? Do they want to go this way or that way? I'm hopeful to figure something like that out.
Seems like you're saying the best way to participate now, because it's early, is to be helping in this brainstorming stage or contributing to this diagramming, mapping out the possibilities effort.
Yeah, we've effectively done similar things like earlier on in Zcash history with just the ECC people who are working on it, and then ECC and ZF together figuring out like what feature sets make sense and what things can be well, at the time considered to be easily deployed alongside each other. Doesn't always play out in practice, but because you have those kinds of ones where you have interdependencies within the features, and then you just have things where it's like, yeah, we thought something was great, it wasn't great, we want to fix it, and it's not too much technical debt removal at the same time as our main feature, and it's convenient to do it at the same time. So you'll have some features that will carry on like that. Like, for example, one of the things that we have been considering and playing around with is the idea of, so you have the memo field in transactions, and currently the memo field is associated with a given output. And if you have a transaction that has a large number of dummy outputs, or in the case of ZSAs, split note outputs, like dummy outputs on that side, you end up with a larger transaction field cost for that you're using for nothing, that's just taking up blockchain space. So one of the options there is to move the memo field piece to a separate part of the transaction, so then users can choose to have fewer memos in there, and instead each output is given the capability to decrypt it. That has some privacy considerations that need to be made there in terms of, like, you're adding another way that transactions can be visibly different. But if the Schelling point becomes everyone either uses the one output for everything mode or just one memo because that's all we need, then that can be an overall sort of like nice cleanup improvement. But that kind of change is relatively, it affects wallets, but it doesn't affect like mining nodes. So they can be sort of independent efforts that get deployed at the same time potentially.
In the longer term, we may want to start looking at removing the messaging component from the Zcash blockchain entirely. So at the moment, as well as memo fields, we write notes to the blockchain, but we also write the information that the recipient needs in order to be able to spend that note, and that's why you end up scanning the blockchain. In the longer term, particularly if we end up moving to some sort of scalability solution that involves some form of roll-up, we may want to explore having a different out-of-band style mechanism for transmitting the information that the recipient needs in order to be able to spend that note to them, and not having everything stored on the blockchain. And that could, ultimately put us in a position where we could end up with a far more efficient, smaller blockchain, making it quicker to sync and whatnot. The downside is that if I want to send some ZEC to Strad, I will need to write the transaction, write it to the Zcash blockchain, but then separately send him a message, and that could be through any mechanism, which tells him how he can then spend that node.
Yeah,
that's probably looking further down the roadmap than is reasonable right now.
Yeah, the trade-off you're making there is the efficiency of the main chain and efficiency of discovery and things versus recoverability. Is the chain itself currently the chain itself is used as the store of prior information, and if you drop your phone in a mud puddle and then step on it, you can then go to the store, grab your wallet, go back to your safety deposit box or your iCloud account, grab your seed phrase, stick it back in, and you're fine.
Yeah.
And with that kind of approach, we would need some other recovery mechanisms to be built into place.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that I think that's a bit further down the track, but it's good to be thinking about it in context of new things we're looking at deploying to the network, like ZSAs and so on, in terms of what constraints they place on the information that users need to be able to obtain and transact with their funds.
Yeah.
You got any reaction, Taylor? Saw you nodding. But
So something to sort of like bring all of this together that's on my mind is I think we need to, for both ZSAs and proof of stake and potential scalability improvements, we need to try to really hard to build a complete product suite. Like, first imagine what we want to put out in the world and what people are going to come and want to use. And we want to make sure that's complete in the sense that, so for example, with the NU5 upgrade, There's a lot of excitement around getting rid of the trusted setup, but it was kind of launched in a way where the protocol got activated, but then support was missing for wallets. So people who were really excited about it couldn't immediately start using it. So I think for both ZSAs and proof of stake, we should really like imagine what is like everything we need so that the people who are really excited to be validators, to make stable coins and to stake their ZEC, make sure they have everything they need from day one so that that hype lands really well in the market and then we see a lot of use.
All right, I'll move on. You want to react?
Well, I wanted to follow up with that too. Like, I think it's not just about getting products ready when the protocol activates, but if we can get more of the end product prototyping started earlier, it can inform the actual protocol design sometimes. So it'd be nice if we could catch, you know, like, oh, if we change this piece of the protocol, the usability of this like prototype is a lot nicer. Why don't we do that now instead of after we've deployed?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, like kind of turning it around so you're not making the technical protocol decisions on their own without considering the UX. Like design the UX first, and then what protocol do we need to implement that UX? That's a great point.
Yeah. Which is why wallet devs should show up to Arborist calls.
In my previous life, working with banks, one of the ways that I used to design systems was I would do a wireframe design of the interface that the end user would interact with. And then you figure out from that, right, what information are you gathering? What information needs to be brought in? What data needs to be, you know, market data, for example, needs to be solicited? What states do you transition through if you're creating a transaction? Well, you put in these bits of information. It then has to pull maybe an exchange rate, then displays you something, you hit confirm. And then that actually helps you then design the back-end systems and the back-end flow for all these systems. And I think it's something that we should think about trying to inculcate into our product process for Zcash, and doing so at the ecosystem level, like going out and saying, what would you like to see on Zcash, or what are the business objectives that we want to see for Zcash, whether it's something like decentralization? How do we incentivize more people to run nodes? You know, maybe instead of having a proof of stake, what we have is a proof of service where you get rewarded for running a node. And in order to make sure that you run a node honestly, you have to put up a security deposit that gets slashed if you behave dishonestly, right? So maybe we need to start experimenting a little bit with twisting our thinking to say, right, what are the objectives that we want to achieve for Zcash, or what do our users or potential users want to do, and then figuring out what can we build, or how can we build that capability in at the protocol layer so that it can then be exposed by the UI and UX developers.
Do you think, as it regards proof of stake, that this would be something that would be, I don't know, visible through that process, that users would say they want to be able to stake or something like that? Yeah. All right, I'll move on past proof of stake. So this next one we'll start out addressed towards Ying Tong. So did an excellent presentation on quite a range of possible approaches towards programmability. Maybe just by picking one of them, you don't have to answer it for all of the spectrum of approaches there, but you know, what would you say is like a roadmap process towards the deployment of some programmability approach of your choice beyond ZSAs?
I think the least invasive approach to programmability would be to do it on layer 2. So to do it on an overlay network. So concretely, the changes that would require on layer 1 would just be some kind of way to post data between L1 and L2. So Ethereum calls this data blobs. And as Dodger, I think, was saying, like this further sort of separates the concerns between the plain text or memo field messaging layer and like the actual transfers that are native to Zcash. And yeah, I think, for example, Zexi or Alio, they're really flexible, and they allow any kind of logic to be deployed to the network. And a great way to use this flexibility is to encode like the state transition function for whatever application or rollup you want. And yeah, what your application does internally, it can be totally arbitrary. It can be like TEEs. It can be like just like MPC computations all day long. But the point being that, first of all, Zcash users who are just using Zcash for transfers are minimally affected. And I think secondly, if we introduce some kind of sort of depth one recursion that hides which application you're using, then all applications could benefit from the same anonymity set. And I think that's one of the big advantages of Zcash right now. If you compare it to, say, Tornado Cash, Zcash has a huge anonymity set in comparison. And yeah, if we could allow layer 2 applications to easily make use of that, I think that would be just a more welcoming environment for people to build their own applications.
Can I comment?
You want to react? Yeah, please.
I in particularly like that level 1 recursion piece, because if we do want to start introducing trusted execution environments, instead of giving them, like a first-class place in Zcash, you're still zero knowledge proof first for that recursion. But then whatever you're verifying, you could verify an attestation from a trusted execution and choose to switch vendors or do whatever you need to keep your security of TE going on. I think it's interesting to consider a TE augmented Zcash ecosystem, because in the past those were like completely different pieces of technology that wouldn't sit together, and I think we're way past that. It would be I think a very quick win to unlock a huge usability for everyone.
Yeah, like for example, let's say for ZSA swaps, currently you need matchers who are off-chain and who see the details, plain text, values and asset types being swapped. Whereas if you wanted to deploy this matcher algorithm as a smart contract living inside the TEE, then users would no longer have to submit their swaps to some centralized matcher. Instead, they could encrypt it to some TEE. Yeah, that's one example.
And that would broadly have the benefit of the actual swap itself, the settlement completely independent of that matcher algorithm. So never any TE failure putting funds at risk. So
yeah, we need to keep in mind the security risks of any model that uses TEEs. So TEEs are in a sense like fundamentally impossible, because like the secret data is literally in the processor somewhere, just a matter of how hard it is to extract it. And on top of that, there's been a bunch of side channel attack research that have just like totally devastated Intel SGX and other TEs. So I think the key is really like balancing the trust you put in the TEE with like the trust level that the TE is proven in practice. So like once it's been a few years since someone has found the latest side channel attack, then you can sort of trust it for maybe don't trust funds to it, but you can trust it for some like privacy applications and things like that.
I really like the idea of your suggestion also of keeping a very firm layer between the ordinary Zcash transactions and this extra execution layer.
Yeah.
But I think that idea of having separation between the layers is really interesting. I know, Andrew, that you're a big fan of TEs. You think they've got huge potential. I, on the other hand, have been skeptical about the prospect of tying Zcash to a specific hardware platform. But if you can get the advantages of TEEs at a separate layer, whilst keeping the Zcash layer 1 hardware agnostic, I think that achieves the best of both worlds. And also that idea of having separate layers, we've kind of prototyped that a little bit in the past with our work with JP Morgan back in, I think, was it
2017?
2017, when we had the model there was you had a programmability layer, which was private between the participants in the deal, which then settled its actual transaction to the shared layer 1. And I think it's potentially a very powerful model to use going forward.
Yeah, we've been discussing programmability on and off for quite some time, I think now, and actually sort of jumping off Taylor's point there, one of the reasons that at least I, as a full node maintainer, have been reluctant in the past is the way, like the capabilities that we had for doing programmability in a shielded way were quite limited. And so the approaches that were mostly being considered were either like way too expensive to be viable for shielded, or they were looking at extensions of transparent programmability with the intention that, oh, we can just migrate to shield later. And it's the we can just part that's the devil in the details. We already have the case that just within the Bitcoin script system that we have for transparent Zcash, there's like a whole swath of possible programs that people can build and use, and we have very little way to actually introspect what's going on there because it's all hidden behind hash commitments, even though everything is eventually public. Fortunately, I did some trawling of the network, and it looks like about 98% of it is all just multi-sig, effectively. And I think the remaining thing is some people were doing some like attempts at hash time lock contracts at one point. So like the actual set of observed like programs that someone has spent money from is pretty small. But now that we're starting to see these more viable, more usable shielded execution environment and shielded programmability platforms there, that's less of a concern now because we know that the scope of things that people can do there is large enough that it's useful, and there's no concern with like adding, like there was adding transparent technical debt that we then have to figure out how to migrate later, and onboarding use cases that we couldn't fundamentally support later.
The one big thing that's also happening is because you have, or you're about to have Zcash shielded assets, the moment of issuance give you a lot of flexibility on what that asset should be doing, allowing, and you can have that as a point where you decide on, what's that extra layer of programmability. You wouldn't be experimenting with core Zec on things just as an experiment, but with ZSA you can probably allow yourself to dedicate an asset for some experimentation without it's pretty limited spill elsewhere.
I do want to say, my framing for the importance of programmability is that it's a hedge against being unable to correctly predict what is going to be the most usage case. You never need programmability if you know the applications you'd want. You don't need scripting language if you know you just want multi-sig. You just make a multi-sig feature. So the goal for programmability is always to have a way that you can let someone else permissionlessly define some application that you hadn't thought of.
So yeah, I was gonna consider an alternative. So first of all, I really like keeping the separation of layers if possible, to keep the core simpler. But then where my mind would go is, and it comes down to a lot of details, but like what exactly is the difference between keeping a good layer separation and having a second layer versus a good bottom layer that can just bridge to other ecosystems? Because often, I kind of have this notion that it's sort of like if building the protocol is making the layout and building the buildings for city, That could be awesome if people move in, but they might really like another city that's already there, and like, can we connect to it? So that's often where my mind goes. Is I guess I prefer, all things being equal with the difference between the two, I prefer to sort of prioritize bridging with the assumption that if we can connect to where people want to go or where the applications already are, then it seems like a good win.
But it might be a way to do bridging much more easily, because the bridging is beginning to be solved, pairwise in many different blockchains.
Yeah.
Maybe you can adapt and adopt the solutions that you think are the most secured, using this extra layer of trusted execution.
Yeah, actually, to counteract my point, I've been talking to some teams about with like different bridging products or technologies, and I asked one of them like, "Hey, I'm working on this proof of stake proposal. Are there any requirements that your bridging thing would have that I should know about? Because maybe that would inform the design I'm working on." And they were like, they didn't know too much about Zcash, and they're like, "Okay, well, do you have smart contracts so we can deploy a light client on your system that bridges into our system?" And I was like, not yet. So it's kind of a funny chicken and egg problem.
And in this conversation, trusted execution and ZK EVM, or just EVM in a trusted execution, those are all legit places to check, to have rapid wins and adoption from these ecosystems.
And bridging to and from Zcash in particular, I think is only interesting if the bridging composes anonymity sets. So like, I think otherwise it's like a little bit pointless, I think. Yeah, you might as well bridge to and from Bitcoin.
I don't think so, by the way. But just because like just a simple story is like, if I could bridge Zec from the shielded pool to Ethereum, then it's really simple to unlink things. So like I could register an ENS name, and then I could issue, some like MakerDAO or like do some DeFi thing and keep those very unlinked, which in a way that might be difficult without using some other privacy technology. So I grant that it's nicer if sort of the horizon of privacy is even more extended, but I think already, that's providing something useful if we can get there.
Yeah, I think if you consider two-way bridging as well, that's when it becomes important to compose these anonymity sets. And yeah, if I bridge to Ethereum and I just never come back, then I agree. You're effectively using Zcash as a big mixer. Yeah, if we actually want to bridge in a way that preserves the anonymity set and also preserves like invariance across the two chains, then that becomes a very non-trivial design challenge. Yeah.
All right, I might move on from programmability. That was great. We went through a bunch of nuanced discussion on pretty specific technical directions. The next questions will be a little bit more broad. This one will go to Taylor kind of first. So far with Zcash, we have like the top stellar reputation for security, quality of zero-knowledge proof development, general reliability of the system overall. As we start to increase our community involvement, more organizations, more collaboration on different parts of features that fit together somehow, your independent security researcher viewpoint is, I think, especially appreciated there. Like, what do you think we should be doing to make sure that we are not giving up our brand of quality security?
Well, number one thing, go see my talk that I gave today about security engineering. Basically, we want to make sure that we're doing all the standard things like audits, code reviews done internally by organizations, ECC has a really, really good track record for just being super careful with code they deploy, retroing any kind of bug that gets discovered. And that's really paid off. Like there hasn't been a major security vulnerability in a really long time. So sort of extending that to the broader community, I think it's important to make sure that like the projects, especially like ZCG grant recipients, have security support. So I'm going to recommend like, currently that's sort of my role is to audit these projects. And I'm going to recommend like opening that up to an even wider audience of security engineers by putting out RFPs so that way we can get like more attention from audit firms and individual contributors who come and start to audit our projects. Yeah, so really the main things are like learning from failure and just being careful and auditing stuff.
Anyone else thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, from a, like if we think about the effects that bugs can have, like that's actually the sort of the thing that drives the review policy that we use for Zcashd is like thinking about like blast radius of a bug. So we sort of split them into roughly 3 levels of like a bug's going to affect the people who encounter it. A bug could affect everyone using a particular product or a wallet or something, and in particular could risk user funds. Or a bug could be like existential, you know, affecting the consensus rules, affecting the like the core pieces that mean that it would affect the entire network, no matter whether you were running the vulnerable software or not.
Can I add one more layer to that? There's people outside of Zcash that consider Zcash as a huge place to check the cryptographic primitives. So,
cryptography review as a service.
as a really, really expensive service. But I would say that the catastrophic failure can, you know, go all the way there.
Yeah, yeah, well beyond the people who are in the software, indeed. And so one of the things that like in terms of limiting the reach of a security issue, well, we have the full node developers, so primarily ECC and ZF at this point, but anyone who's maintaining the Zcashd or ZebraD nodes, which, by the way, anyone's free to like just offer their own support for either of these if they wish, like their own support policies, and act as someone who is helping to maintain these. But the people who are the ones merging the code in there form sort of like the technical backstop. And so, you know, we end up having to sort of necessarily have the final say of what's going to go in and what is sufficient review, sufficient consideration for these things to be safe for our users. Now, how to scale that as the number of organizations and the number of changes involved grows is interesting, but my hope is it would be somewhat self-limiting in that, you know, as you're finding these very large changes be quite technical and slow and like large to get moved in. So it's sort of like in a level rate limiting in terms of how much we can and how rapidly we can change the project. And that hopefully means that the review burden on the things coming in is something that we as a collective project can continue to manage and deal with from that. When you get down to like that next radius in where it's like risking user funds, there you're looking at more like the individual wallet behaviors and things where like, you know, it's limited to the user of a single wallet. And so that's where things like what Taylor's been doing are fantastic for sharding out the security work that's done there.
Another thing to add here is that like we're talking about the security of like new features that we're adding, but we can also get a lot of security returns by like simplifying the code. Like if we could switch over to Zebra and delete the Zcashd code base, that'd be great because like we wouldn't have all of this like code written in a memory unsafe language that we inherited from Bitcoin a long time ago. And things like deprecating the Sprout pool would be like really good things that don't necessarily add new features, but they really like pay down our security risk.
I think one aspect of security that actually grows with the number of contributors is basically more eyes on the code. So my experience working with Halo 2 has shown me like pretty much we implemented Halo 2 for the so that we could build the Orchard circuit. And then it got adopted by lots of projects like in Ethereum verse for really unimaginable applications way beyond the Orchard circuit, like whole virtual machines are being built as Halo 2 circuits and like huge neural nets. So the effect of this increased adoption and usage has been people getting more concerned about security. And I've seen people developing like formal verification and mechanized proving for Halo 2 circuits. So this amount of analysis, I think what was only possible with like the expanded interest and usage beyond just Orchard. But yeah, that is not to say that we're merging these like machine learning circuits and VMs into Zcash Halo 2.
Programmability.
Yeah, there's some benefits from other like having more contributors that we can still gain security wise.
It's a really cool, point out benefit of, it answers the question of like, what is it that we're getting by, knowing that a lot of the technical work that we do gets, aped and copied by everyone else. What are we getting from that? That's a really cool point of benefit getting. Nate, still calling you.
Well, sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, but for security, one thing I want to make sure we're keeping an eye on, especially as we grow larger with multiple organizations, is figuring out how to handle like inbound requests, like who's going to notice when there's a problem, or if someone's showing up like a Zcash user and they're like, hey, this thing seems weird, who do they contact, or how do they know who to contact? Or if they're, how can we detect those? How can we educate people who to contact, and how can we sort of do the switchboard correctly to get the right teams involved whenever we're needing to respond to something? That piece, that incoming piece, seems really important for me, for us to keep our eyes on.
Do you think we need a community channel somehow beyond what we have then? Those kind of things don't necessarily lend themselves towards like arborist call kind of things, especially if they're sensitive.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more about like incident response. So you don't talk about it on arborist call. So like just from experience, like the latest incident we were dealing with at ECC was a security issue that affected a lot of Bitcoin clones. And so I don't even remember how we got contacted, but somebody was like, hey, we're contacting all the Bitcoin clones. And so we've gotten in touch with you, ECC. And one question is, why did they pick us? Like, why, and not the foundation? Or maybe they did contact the foundation. So, I mean, we looped in the foundation, and it turns out like they did not have to worry about that problem because of their new code base, but it was important to check. So I don't know if I have a clear response or answer here, but just in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, how did they figure out to contact ECC?
They probably went to Zcash/Zcash in the repo and just clicked security. Is my guess.
So those kinds of mechanisms, however people are figuring out what it is, let's just make sure. Let's make sure we're keeping track of that as we're growing to multiple orgs.
That looked like it kind of worked.
No, it worked well in that case. It's just like
with the only two organizations and needing to.
I'm pretty sure if somebody is like, I think my ZSA is malfunctioning, and they hit you up, we'll find a way to.
Yeah. I mean, it can be kind of obvious for now, but like, once we're talking about bridging, or like there's second layers with programmability, or there's more and more wallets or more applications, maybe sometimes that starts to become inefficient or even more of a risk, because, ideally for a security incident, you want to figure out how to get the people who can fix it in the loop quickly, but you don't want to loop in too many extraneous parties, because there's more and more risk that somebody might take advantage of that. So like the example with that big recent bug involved like dozens or more Bitcoin-like projects. And so it was really nerve-wracking. Like, I don't know who all these people are. A lot of those projects were unresponsive. So we don't know, if it was kind of it's an instructive scenario to think about because the blast radius was multiple chains. Well, there's a lot of Bitcoin clone chains where I do not trust the people behind them, right? So are some of those people involved in learning about this attack? Just these kinds of issues we want to keep an eye on as we're growing.
To that point of sort of like a shared understanding of how we go about things, I mean, yeah, the incident response process in most orgs, I imagine, follows the same kind of procedure. It would be nice if we had like if the relevant orgs who are involved in Zcash have, we already somewhat have this informally between some of the earlier orgs, but having some more dedicated security contacts and shared understanding of the incident response process, so that we can have, like, instead of it being just like an ECC response call or a ZF response call, it's the, we have the Zcash, strike team or whatever we ping the
tree surgeons.
Yeah, we ping the Zec signal, and everyone flies in from the trees, and so maybe that then is the security group of if there's 4 orgs, 4 people, and they're the first ones who pick it up. They all have a shared understanding of the response process, and then from there they can sort of pull in like, oh, this is just an ECC thing. Okay, well the other orgs are aware, but it can now transition to be an ECC response, for instance.
Yeah, I'd be very much. In fact, I've already kind of mentioned that idea to Nick. I think that the ECC's response process, it was initially drafted by me. It was improved by Bam Bam and Taylor. It has evolved over time. I think that we should just adopt it as the Zcash ecosystem incident response process, because one of the things that I think worked incredibly well was during the whole Halborn disclosure was that we had multiple people. We had people from ECC, we had people from ZF, and we had Taylor all collaborating really, really, really well. It was ECC that was leading it in that instance, and that made absolute sense, even with hindsight. But I think it worked incredibly well. The outcome was really, really good, and I think that we want to make sure that future incidents have a similar good process and good outcome.
Yeah, there's definitely room for like a grant-funded organization that just like is the security contact, does security coordination, and also has engineers on staff, so that like if you need to do a rapid response bug fix, those engineers can actually go into a community project that might just be someone's hobby, make the fix and get it out there quickly.
Yeah, so maybe for that kind of coordination, it would be prudent to loop in ZCG, wallet projects, big grantees. So yeah, and then figuring out like the right size of the group, who are the participants, is something we should sort out.
Yeah.
All right, I'd love to move along and ask a next question that starts with you, Strad. So actually, you kind of brought up this topic of deprecating old things and paying off technical debt. This was inspired by a forum question from Ole or Olek from our forum. That's about first of all, is there already a plan to deprecate Sprout? And
yeah, we've already made strides on that part of the roadmap in. Let's see. So obviously, the first thing to deprecating Sprout is alternative. So NU2 or 1, I forget the numbering scheme. NU1 with sapling, we introduced sapling. We now have sapling and orchard. And then in the NU5 in particular, we introduced a new transaction format, the V5 format, where we just don't include any Sprout fields. So if you only support V5, you can't create Sprout or use Sprout. We still support V4 transactions on the network, which are the ones that still have a Sprout field but don't have Orchard. So you can't use both at the same time, which is little things that we sort of do along the way to try and migrate things. We've also turned off the ability to send funds into the Sprout pool. So at this point, it is a purely deflationary pool. As people can move funds around within it and then pull them out, but there's no further way to inject more long-term usage into that pool. So as far as like a roadmap for removing it, we've got a couple of options that have been discussed around that we want to take seat on. I would like to see another ratchet of this, like ratchet forward of this in the next network upgrade, if possible. Whether that just be we turn off the ability to do any kind of transaction instead of just except removing, although that has some potential like privacy issues in terms of the way the Sprout worked. Or I know that you've talked about, Dodger, some ideas for taking the Sprout set off and making it separately spendable, but in a way that lets us get rid of all the consensus pieces for Sprout.
Yeah, my really bad idea, and if you read the GitHub issue that describes this, it literally says, this is a terrible idea, but this ticket should remain open until we come up with a better idea. And the idea was that we take the Sprout state, and then we basically move it off the blockchain and create a faucet where anybody who owns a Sprout note has to go to the faucet, create a proof using their Sprout keys that they own a certain a note or whatever, and then are able to present that proof to someone, or a multi-sig organization that controls the Sprout wallet that will then dispense those funds back to them. It's a terrible idea, and we shouldn't do it. The question is, is there something that we can do better? Can we take, for example, the Sprout state, wrap it up into something that can then exist on Orchard, and then allow people to use their Sprout keys to create a transaction that they can then spend from Orchard?
Yeah, there are definitely ways to go about doing this. And at that point, it's a trade-off in what's the minimum we could sort of pare back all the Sprout code to where it just has enough to be able to verify this. And I mean, in the simplest case, you could remove all of the Sprout shielding tech by just requiring people to reveal the note on chain. But the other thing to consider with that bit of deprecation is that there's the economic side of people will have lost keys. There will be funds that will never move. That pool will have some minimum value that will never go below. And at some point, it's like, well, as a community, we want to keep the code base as a maintainer, I really want to keep the code base in a maintainable state, reducing the security burden on us and the rest of the network. And so cutting out those pieces and making a decision on what to do with the leftover funds is something that we should be looking into. That's on the technical side, removing stuff is really easy. Like, I love deleting code, but it's the economic representation of what that means that's the blocking piece at this point in terms of what we can do to move that forward.
Yeah. What if somebody, back shortly after Zcash launched, bought 1,000 Zec, put it, created a paper wallet, and then locked it away in a safe deposit box, planning to come back to it in 10 years' time, and they come back and, oh, sorry, your funds are gone. Like that sort of reputational risk, I think we have to be very, very cognizant of.
Yeah, I think this is something we need to be careful about, especially with future pools. Given that to completely get rid of the complexity, we have to burn funds. I think it's really important to actually send a clear message when we're creating a new pool. Like, can you rely on your funds to be retrievable 10, 20 years from now? Or is there some expectation that you're going to have to move your funds regularly? And if we do create that expectation, how do we do the user experience for it? So that how do you make it hard for someone to forget to move their funds every year or something like that? I don't know. That's something designers should be thinking about. How do you incentivize people to keep their funds live and prevent people from forgetting about their funds.
So last year, I had a proposal that we start a regular ongoing process that would find funds that are sitting in old pools and then eventually just completely remove those pools. So this is the kind of proposal where it is a big problem now, like with Sprout, especially if somebody buried a key and they expect to dig it up in 10 years. So my thinking, and I don't, it's kind of controversial, but if we bite the bullet now, then we won't have the same problem with sapling or orchard or so on and so forth. So I'm kind of an advocate that we just establish a norm or an expectation that pools get regularly retired after X years. And that's just something people coming into Zcash need to learn about. But that's pretty controversial. It's very different from most other cryptocurrencies. It's like definitely the opposite of how I perceive like Bitcoin norms or values. But I still like it. I think it has some benefits. So the obvious one is for technical debt. So there's always this trade-off between, okay, what about these users who buried their keys 10 years ago? So a lot of times people focus on the detriment to them of doing this. But in my mind, there's also a cost to current users and new users, because if we have a norm or establish an agreement that we never move the old funds, then we have this challenge of the old tech always remaining there and always representing some risk to current and future users. So there is kind of a trade-off in my mind, and I'm a fan of skewing more towards continual improvement. And hopefully, if that sort of norm were adopted, then the ecosystem would sort of evolve protection mechanisms around it somehow through education or maybe like technical product means. But
is there a way to know the numbers? Like how much?
Numbers of what?
Like how much is in this oldest pool?
Yeah. The
30,000
balances of the pools are known.
Yeah, it's about 30,000 Zec.
So
you use the phrase "find the funds," but you just mean kind of treating it by a.
Oh yeah. So I meant like that proposal specifically was like there'd be a penalty if you don't move it, and it would sort of ramp up, and eventually it gets to 100%, and at that point it gets deleted. Yeah. So
ZSAs are not aware of any pool besides Orchard, right?
At the moment, yes, that's correct.
Right, but could they be?
Sprout asset as a ZSA.
Yeah.
And airdrop it. Yeah. So, I mean, I talked a little bit about that in my presentation. The thing is, I think those kinds of approaches are feasible technically, but the question is, how often will it get exercised? So, like, if we put a bunch of like effort and expertise and brilliance to build out this advanced, sophisticated things, what if there's like 0 Sprout users? It's all lost keys. We don't know. But what if it is, and we just did all that effort and it never gets used? Or what if there are users, we do all this effort, but it's like a really weird thing, because they're only going to want to migrate like one time. So it's like building a product that's only going to be used once, and then when it is used, how do we know it's really going to work well, right? Like, do they need a special wallet? And who distributes that wallet, and like, does it install? Like, how do we know? Like, we would have to do ongoing maintenance for this sort of one-time event. So I'm kind of concerned about how well that can work.
Yeah, but like we're already at the point now where the clock is ticking on. If you have Sprout funds, you can use them, because like we have
as of a release or two ago, we've turned off the ability to create Sprout transactions entirely in Zcash because just technically maintaining it was just too burdensome. And we had slowly been turning things off in various places, like preventing using Sprout at all if you're involving Orchard and things. But yeah, after the more recent changes for ZIP 317 and things, you can't use the current version of Zcash with that. Now, you can still at the moment go back and use an older, like a 5 whatever version of Zcash to spend your crowd funds. That's not going to work post NU6. So if someone wants to be able to spend their funds, they are already on somewhat of a clock to easily do so. And after that, it's going to become much harder. They're going to have to seek support from someone to have a build of Zcash that both lets you spend funds and builds on NU6 or is a separate from Zcash wallet or something. So like, even if at the consensus layer, we are technically still supporting these users, like the rest of the ecosystem is moving on and will continue to do so everywhere else.
Also interesting to think about, like, if somebody did show up, so that, maybe they try a new wallet and somehow they learn that, oh, I can't access my Sprout funds, then what do? It seems like they would have to get really vocal, which has a really funny privacy implication. Like, hey, everybody, I really need you to help me.
Hey, I've got 10,000 Zec.
Yeah. So it's a pickle.
Everything is a privacy trade-off in the end.
Yes,
it's all about the trade-offs.
We don't want to know our users, or at least we historically haven't, but that's a flip side because we need to know our users in order to build the things.
Even the Sprout users. Oh, legacy, yeah.
I really want to know who the Sprout users are, so I can tell them, get your funds out.
Would you pay for that? Like maybe a 0.00001% conversion rate between old and new Zec, just to
What's up there with Nate's like diminishing over time? Yeah, it almost sounds like you're suggesting the opposite. Like
yeah, I'm saying only to like market style, like only today you can convert your old Zec to new Zec and you get 0.00001%.
I think it'd be worth it. I think there's got to be a price point where we go, right. If we can clear the Sprout pool, that is worth, I don't know, $10,000 to us or something, and just to not have to worry about it, to be able to deprecate Sprout entirely. We probably can come up with a
limited time offer.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
$9.99.99.
If everybody, and of course, there are going to be lost keys, so this will never happen. But
and you double that if they also give you the story of why they bought that Zec back at the time.
There's a perverse incentive to that, which you want to keep your funds in the old pool so that you get rewarded to move to the new pool. But
it only works once, and then people start to expect it. That's kind of the airdrop's dilemma in general. All right, I'll ask a next question. This one can start being responded to by Dodger. So this is about the network upgrade process in light of expanding the number of people who may be collaborating on future Zcash upgrades. And we'll note that we know that ECC is waiting till the emergency mode ends due to the spam attacks and addressing it to do the proper retrospective on the past NU5. So we expect over the next couple changed in the network upgrade process that might accommodate this more diversified development we're expecting.
Yeah, so I think this is going to become the next network upgrade is likely to come from an entity that's not ECC, and so this is a nettle we have to grasp and get done with. I think we said in the past, I think doing a retro of NU5 is the first logical step, and then talk, have then a conversation, probably centered on Arburst calls or Arburst call spin-offs, where we work together to figure out what does the process for the next network upgrade look like at a high level, and then specifically for whatever it is that's actually going to get deployed. And I think when we were building Zebra, we effectively copied some of the approach that ECC had taken in the past in terms of having audits and whatnot. And during discussions around NU5, we also kind of said, right, we should be making sure that this stuff gets audited, that there's a security proof for the crypto, this sort of stuff. So I think there's already been some work in that space. I think that laying it out more explicitly, giving at least guidelines, maybe we don't want to make them very, very strict rules, but at least guidelines so that other teams know what to expect. Because I think where this question is coming from is like, right, Shielded Labs has raised some money and they want to create the Zcash Sustainability Fund. Well, how do they, okay, they've got the developers. How do they go about actually, getting that change deployed onto the Zcash network? I think it is incumbent upon us to provide a kind of a guideline or a roadmap, right? Start joining the Arborist calls, draft a zip, start getting feedback, start, all this sort of stuff. And then, discussing about what expectations we should be setting for teams around, are they expected to provide implementations for both nodes, or are we, if we end up deciding that we're going to sunset Zcash, then should people be looking at specifically only building on Zebra? So I think there's a lot of I think that for those of us who've been involved in Zcash for a long time, it's really obvious. It's simple. We know how it's gonna look like when another team comes in to add something to the Zcash protocol. It's just not obvious to them yet, and we just need to make sure that we lay it out and make it pretty clear, even if it's not set in stone.
It sounds like you're describing things that that the burden of that is on the proposer or whatever lead of a particular network upgrade. Is that kind of how you're envisioning it? Or just something that altogether should be done before the network upgrade is completed?
Well, I think there's probably two aspects to that. First of all, in theory, anybody can join an Arborist call and say, right, I propose that we make this change to the protocol. We can't have that automatically become a to-do item for people, because there has to be some sort of gate there about practicality and credibility and competence. On the other hand, I think that as maintainers of core Zcash consensus components, we have a responsibility to help teams who are coming in to work on Zcash, and not be saying, no, you're on your own, we're not going to help you. Well, you build it all, and then we'll evaluate your PR when it's been audited. Like that's not practical either. So I think another thing that we probably need to start taking into account is what the Zcash community wants to see deployed. And we did a little bit of that a few years ago, where we polled Zcap, say what are your priorities, and that helps provide some guidance. But maybe going forward, what we need to be doing is when a proposal is brought forward, we go out to the community and say, right, are you in favor of this? And if they are in favor of it, then that kind of we may want to say, well, the expectation then is that the core teams who are receiving dev funding, if there is a future dev fund, are expected then to facilitate and help within reasonable bounds of effort and resources to help this project move forward.
Yeah, I'd really like to see the network upgrade process become more holistic. Like to me currently, it's like a really technical process. Like here's the things we're going to ship, and here's when we're going to ship it, when it'll be on testnet, when you need to get your apps ready by. But I think there's like a real opportunity for us to like, especially since we are like sort of have to be careful with our money, with the coin price where it is and how much of the dev fund is left. There's an opportunity to like sort of use the network upgrade process as an opportunity, as like a moment for us to think like, which like marketing strategy bet should we try this time around, and use it to coordinate not only the technical network upgrades, like the literal changes in consensus rules, but also use it as like a shelling point for like the whole community to rally around. Like if you're a wallet developer, sort of the community has agreed that we're going to target like this use case this year, and maybe think about how you could develop your wallet towards that direction, kind of thing. That'd be cool to see.
Riffing on that more, I feel like it ties back into the discussion about the roadmap, because in my mind, it would be cool not just to be engaging the whole community about like what should we be doing this year, but like, you know, I think it'd be really helpful for the technology people to like try to, you know, draw out or explain longer term maps. And I feel like part of the challenge is there can be different threads, but they're interacting. Sometimes there's alternatives, like you can't do both, and in my opinion, we should be able, I mean, it's kind of tricky, but if there's some way we can represent the alternatives, and each alternative is gonna be like a DAG of like different pieces that go into the future with like a longer time scale, so that as we're approaching any given upgrade, hopefully we would already have a lot more clarity. Like, you know, it seems like the community wants to go with this alternative. It has these pieces. These teams are working on these pieces. Okay, if the close pieces are getting ready, we can start to get those ready for an upgrade. Because in my experience from ECC, I feel like I mean, this is early retrospective, but one thing is I feel like each upgrade, I personally have had more tunnel vision. So it's sort of like, oh, there's the next upgrade, what should we do? And there's been a lack of a longer term roadmap that the community has weighed in on, right? So we have like implicitly some roadmaps, but it would be good to represent them more clearly to the community across orgs.
Yeah. Is there a way you think that you can, make preliminary plans? This is often on my mind that, having an absence of a plan isn't desirable, but then putting long-term things on it maybe makes people think potentially that you're committed to that, which isn't, usually the point. Is there a way to balance that, you think?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to distinguish, because a lot of people want us, and a lot of projects, crypto projects do this because I think it's good marketing, is they have like, here's the next 5 years, here's all these boxes, it's like the schedule. But what I'm talking about is not that, because it's more of a map of like, here's possibilities. And it also, what I'm imagining isn't necessarily time-based, it's just like, if we have ZSAs, then we could have liquid staking if we already have staking. So, it's a graph, maybe it has like 3 things. And this is like...
It's dependencies.
Yeah, dependencies. And it's more of just a map. So it's not like...
It's like a liquid Gantt chart.
It's separate. It's separate from, this is what we as a community are committed to. The first step is like, here's what's possible that people are interested in. And the second step is, okay, let's commit.
The timing to that, I guess, is right after you deliver the next network upgrade, because the reason I think for the tunnel vision during network upgrades is that you're really focused on, closing your bugs and making sure that you're not forgetting anything. And then right behind that, you can be a little bit like in the odd versions of Linux. It can be like, I don't know if it's still the case now.
Yeah.
But like, okay, like what's up with like development? We have a time for new stuff. What's the direction? And then once you took the time to develop it, you then take the time to upgrade.
Any last words on that? We probably have not enough time to
we have
start a new
43
topic. So.
I mean, if I'm to be very quick, it's that the process of getting stuff in, I think, has not been as conducive to people who are not already very in the stack. And to tie back to the earlier threads of the town hall, making that piece easier, I think will make it easier overall to be a bit more agile in terms of what it is that, where we want to head and where we want to explore.
All right, I think we should wrap up. Thank you all so much. This got everything I wanted out of a technical future-looking roadmap session. So That was great. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you to
Thank
all
you.
all the panel participants. Next up, we are having about an hour's break, and then we will be having drinks and dinner on the second floor in the glass house at, I believe it's called Puro Beach, beside the swimming pool up on the second floor. So an hour to relax, hang out, chat, discuss the future of Zcash if you want, or to head back to your rooms and chill out and have a little break, and then more socializing upstairs. But thank you very much.